Welcome everyone to today's hearing on collusion in higher education. Without objection, I ask unanimous consent for Mr. Nails to be permitted to participate in this hearing, to question the witnesses if a member yields him time for that purpose, of which I will yield him 5 minutes. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, U.S. colleges and universities are $700 billion industry. Harvard endowment alone, which stood north of $50 billion as of 2023, is larger than the GDP of 120 nations. 6 of the 8 Ivy League schools have endowments exceeding $10 billion. Ivy League schools should be competing to offer the best product at the best price possible. Instead, they collude to raise prices and spend their inflated cartel earnings on administrative bloat. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, while products like cars, clothing, and TVs have become more affordable as businesses reduce costs to attract buyers, the cost of college tuition and textbooks has risen by more than 180%, and respectively continues to go higher. Today, the cost to attend an Ivy League school can exceed $100,000 per school year. Ever since the Ivy League was established in the 1950s, these schools have been focused on exclusivity, maximizing profits, and artificially inflated prestige rather than expanding access to education and serving students. In 1950, Harvard charged $600 a year for tuition. Today, that number is nearly $60,000. Not only has tuition skyrocketed, but these schools are also deliberately keeping class sizes small to maintain exclusivity and inflate their perceived prestige. Between 1978 and 2023, while the U.S. population grew by just 50% and the number of applicants increased by 450%, Harvard reduced its class sizes by 258 seats. Across all Ivy League schools, demand has steadily increased, yet admissions remain flat. As you can see from the graph displayed, although each Ivy League school on average receives more than 50,000 applications, it accepts less than 2,000 students per year. These price increases and shrinking class sizes are not coincidental. Ivy League schools have a history of coordinating pricing practices to avoid competing on cost. In 1958, MIT and the 8 Ivy League schools formed what is widely known as the, quote, Ivy Overlap Group, a cartel to fix prices. These schools agreed to use a shared formula for calculating financial aid, ensuring students admitted to multiple schools would pay the same price no matter where they went. In 1989, the Department of Justice began investigating these practices and ultimately filed an antitrust lawsuit. By 1993, all 9 schools had settled. In response, Congress adopted Section 568 of the Improving America's Schools Act of 1994, granting colleges an antitrust exemption, provided they did not consider a student's ability to pay while making admissions decisions. In 1999, elite schools formed a new cartel, the 568 President's Working Group. The goal was the same, to create a shared financial aid formula and not compete for students based on price. Even with a legal exemption, these elite schools still chose profit and prestige over access and fairness. In 2022, former students sued many of the Ivy League schools for colluding on financial aid formulas that favored wealthy applicants. In one internal document uncovered through discovery, a college administrator complained about not being able to find enough qualified students with well-off parents to pay the high sticker prices. She said, quote, "Sure hope the wealthy next year raise a few more smart kids." Ivy League schools can maximize the price paid by each student using detailed financial data collected through the College Scholarship Services Profile, or the CSS profile. It is a comprehensive financial aid form that most colleges do not require. The CSS profile gives these schools access to sensitive information, including family home ownership, savings and retirement accounts, and more. With that information, they can determine how much a prospective student's family can apparently afford to pay and then charge them that amount. Despite valuing their degrees at nearly $400,000, having multi-billion-dollar endowments, and receiving billions more in taxpayer funding, these schools don't prioritize accessibility or quality of education. They prioritize profit and prestige. And even though the Ivy League schools no longer have an antitrust exemption to coordinate on pricing, tuition continues to skyrocket. By setting the industry standard for tuition, the Ivy League creates an umbrella effect that allows other colleges to charge more than they could in a competitive market. Today, we are starting an overdue conversation about how the Ivy League's anti-competitive practices may harm students, taxpayers, and ultimately our country's future. I want to thank the witnesses again for appearing before us today, and I look forward to your input. I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, before I start my opening statement, let me mention a personal stake in this. I am the first member of my family to go to college. We didn't have much money. My father worked on a gas station, and I was offered full scholarships by two Ivy League colleges, Yale and Columbia. I chose Columbia, and I never had to pay a cent. Mr. Chairman, this hearing, like so much else that we have done in this committee under Republican control, takes a serious issue and uses it as little more than an excuse to launch a decidedly unserious so-called investigation. Let's be clear. The cost of tuition at many colleges and universities, not just Ivy League institutions, is too high and is unaffordable for too many families. But the same Republicans who today claim to be concerned about the ability of students and their families to afford college tuition proudly cast their votes 2 weeks ago for a budget reconciliation bill that would take direct aim at student loan programs and other vital student aid. If they really cared about consumer prices, they would not undermine the ability of all students, especially low-income students, to access and afford higher education. They would not make cuts to Pell Grants that would reduce or eliminate access for up to 4 million students. They would not cut student loan subsidies, raising costs for an average borrower by up to $200 a month. They would not make student loan repayments even more difficult and push more students into the predatory private loan market. And they would not include devastating cuts to Medicaid, which will deprive roughly 3.4 million low-income students of much-needed health care. But Republicans showed us very clearly that their priority is tax cuts for billionaires, not affordable higher education. So it is a little difficult to take their concerns seriously today. This hearing also comes in the context of the Trump administration's all-out assault on education and research at colleges and universities across the country, and particularly at Ivy League and other elite universities. The administration has slashed billions of dollars in research grants to universities, which will set back technological innovation and medical advances by decades, not to mention harming our economic growth. At the same time, they are revoking student visas and sending an unmistakable message to prospective students around the globe that they are not welcome. The result is that the brightest minds in the world, who once flocked to this country, will now look to bring their brains and talents elsewhere. But this attack on higher education has an even more sinister purpose. Its real target is academic freedom. Taking a page from the authoritarian playbook, the Trump administration is using every tool at its disposal in a pressure campaign to impose its ideology on independent academic institutions and to bend them into submission. And unfortunately, they have a willing partner in the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee. Instead of using their power as legislators to make education cheaper, more accessible, and easier to pay off for all Americans, Republicans are using the power of this committee to aid and abet President Trump's ideological war against a very narrow slice of higher ed institutions. How absurdly narrow is their focus? They are targeting 8 schools out of about 4,000 in the United States. That amounts to a focus upon less than 0.5% of the American undergraduate population. While President Trump threatens individual schools with cuts for not adhering to his ideology, they are using the power and resources of this committee to pursue yet another empty antitrust theory so that they can bully their political targets. Sadly, this follows a familiar pattern. Last Congress, this subcommittee unleashed baseless antitrust investigations designed to undermine the free speech rights of advertisers and investors that held views disfavored by the majority. When advertisers made the reasonable determination that they did not want their brands associated with extremist views and hate speech on social media platforms, Republicans used the flawed antitrust theory to justify a campaign to threaten and intimidate them into abandoning their efforts at responsible advertising. When investors threatened the profits of big oil and gas companies by considering the risks that climate change posed to our economic future, the committee rushed to the defense of their corporate allies with another hollow antitrust investigation. And now today, they return to the same tired playbook, using the power of this committee to support the Trump administration's efforts to target academic institutions. After having launched an overbroad fishing expedition against Ivy League universities, they're now holding a hearing today to justify these efforts at harassment and intimidation. As I noted at the outset, there are real concerns when it comes to the cost of tuition at colleges and universities. If there is indeed collusion among the Ivy League schools, enforcement by our antitrust agencies, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Department of Justice is the answer, not a partisan probe that merely serves as another broadside against education in America under President Trump. There is much we could do together to bring down the cost of tuition and broaden access to education. Unfortunately, Republicans would rather slash student loans to pay for tax cuts for billionaires while threatening universities that do not bend to Donald Trump's will. Unfortunately, there is one clear loser in the Republican war on science and education. It is the students they claim to support, and I should add, the public that benefits from scientific and medical discoveries that will not now happen in the United States. I appreciate our witnesses for appearing today. I look forward to hearing from them, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first, they set the same general price. Then, second, they demand large amounts of information from the student and their family for each student, and they squeeze every dime they can out of that family for tuition. And then third, they limit class size. So they agree on price, they perfect price discriminate, and they limit output. That's about as anti-competitive behavior as you can get. And then with this windfall of money they get, perfect price discrimination, collusion on the price, limiting the class size at the institution, this windfall of money they get from students and their families and the government, the taxpayers, they hire an unbelievable amount of administrators. Mr. Shea has pointed that out. Such a deal for taxpayers and families. That's what's going on, and thank goodness the chairman's having a hearing on this. It's ridiculous, and everyone knows it. Not to mention all the crazy things we saw and witnessed at these institutions over the last few years, all kinds of crazy protests, taking over buildings, anti-Semitic behavior. I mean, not to mention all that. That's what's going on, and the ranking member of the subcommittee says, we're wasting our time? You've got to be kidding me. The taxpayers appreciate that their tax money actually is used in the right way, not like it's being used at these institutions. So again, I want to thank the chairman for this hearing. I look forward to our witnesses and thank them for being present today and testifying. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our witnesses for joining us today. Republicans convened us in the middle of the night a couple weeks ago to pass their billionaire tax break bill, which even Elon Musk, their great hero, now calls a disgusting abomination. Another class war tax scam that will not only throw 14 million Americans off of their Medicaid, but increase the national debt by $3 trillion, In case our friends missed it, Elon Musk, who you've been praising since this administration began, has a message for you today. Shame on you. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong.
Objection. The
says
chair is
Elon Musk.
authorized to declare
So I
recess
was pleasantly surprised to see
at
we were going to
any
have a hearing
time.
on antitrust
We welcome
because there
everyone
used to be
to today's hearing
Republicans
on
like
collusion
progressive
in higher
trust buster
education.
Teddy Roosevelt
Without
who
objection,
actually believed in
asking
protecting
unanimous
the American
consent for
people
Mr. Nails
against price-fixing
to be permitted
conspiracies,
to participate
monopoly,
in this hearing.
and runaway
The
corporate
question to
power. I thought
witnesses,
perhaps,
if a
Mr.
member
Chairman,
yields
we could
him
get
time for
together
that
to protect
purpose,
our
of which
personal data,
I will yield
to
him 5
investigate
minutes.
alleged monopolization
now,
of live events
recognize
tickets
myself
and lower
for an
prices
opening
on
statement.
everything from eggs and other
According to
groceries
the National
to
Center for
credit
Education
card junk
Statistics,
fees, which have
U.S.
been
colleges and
soaring under the
universities
Trump
are
administration, despite his
$700
promise that he would
billion
lower the price of eggs and everything else on
$700
day
billion
one. Silly
industry.
me. Like everything
Harvard
else,
endowment alone,
antitrust
which
in the
stood
hands of
north
our
of
friends
$50
is just
billion,
one more
as
chance
of
to attack
2023 is
America's
larger than the
colleges and
GDP of
universities
120
that
nations.
refuse to surrender
6 of the 8
control
Ivy League
to that
schools have
luminary
endowments
academic
exceeding
scholar Donald
$10
Trump,
billion.
who wants the federal government
Ivy League
to take
schools
over
should be
faculty
competing to
hiring,
offer the best
student
product at the
admissions,
best
and
price possible.
academic affairs
Instead,
at
they
every
collude to
university
raise
in
prices
America.
and spend
And I don't
their
even know why
inflated
Donald Trump's so
cartel
mad at
earnings
Harvard.
on
They let in his
administrative
son-in-law, Jared
bloat.
Kushner, after the Kushner family
According
donated
to the Bureau of Labor
$500,000
Statistics, while
to get him
products
in,
like cars,
just like Trump
clothing, and
pardoned
TVs
Kushner's
have
father,
become more
Charles,
affordable
a
as
major
businesses
Trump donor
reduce
who's our new
costs
ambassador to
attract
France
buyers.
for his multiple
The cost
convictions
of
for
college
tax
tuition and
evasion
textbooks
and
has
witness
risen
tampering.
by more
now
than
that would be a worthwhile hearing,
180%,
Mr. Chairman,
and
how wealthy
respectively
people like the
continues
Kushners
to
and the
go
Trumps
higher.
buy
Today, the
their way
cost to
in
attend
to
an Ivy League
America's
school
elite
can
institutions,
exceed
as Donald Trump calls
$100,000
them.
per school year.
But antitrust
Ever
is now
since
just
the
a
Ivy
weapon of
League was
political
established
attack,
in the 1950s,
not economic
these
analysis.
schools have been
When
focused
businesses
on
advocate
exclusivity,
sustainable investing,
maximizing
House Republicans
profits, and
accuse them
artificially
of
inflated
violating
prestige
antitrust.
rather than
When consumers
expanding
want to
access
exercise the right to
education
boycott,
and serving
Republicans
students.
accuse them of violating
In
antitrust.
1950,
Gee, if you don't
Harvard
support their
charged
monstrous, ugly
$600
tax
a
break
year
bill
for
for
tuition.
billionaires, they'll accuse
Today, that
you of
number is
violating
nearly
antitrust. We'll probably be having a
$60,000.
hearing on how
Not
Elon
only has
Musk is now
tuition
violating
skyrocketed,
antitrust
but these
since he's
schools are
turned
also
against
deliberately
Donald
keeping
Trump
class
and
sizes
their
small
appalling
to
bill.
maintain
So today they're
exclusivity
accusing
and
8
inflate
universities
their perceived
who represent
prestige.
less than one half
Between
of
1978 and
1% of
2023,
undergraduate
while the
students
U.S.
in the
population
entire
grew by
market
just
across America
50%,
of engaging
and
in
the
some
number of
completely
applicants
vague and
increased by
massive antitrust
450%,
conspiracy.
Harvard reduced its
Republicans
class
actually
sizes
trotted
by
out
258
this pathetically weak
seats.
theory in the first Trump administration,
Across all
and of
Ivy League
course no
schools,
antitrust
demand
scholars
has
took it
steadily
seriously,
increased, yet
and even
admissions
their
remain
own
flat.
Department of Justice
As you can see from
didn't
the
do
graph
anything with
displayed,
it. They
although
control the
each Ivy League
antitrust
school
division
on average
again.
receives
Why
more
do they
than
need another hearing in this
50,000
committee? Why don't they just bring their
It accepts
case
less
if
than
there's a
2,000
case?
students
They've
per
got the
year.
power. That's what they've been talking about. Look,
These price
this is pure
increases and
power
shrinking
politics.
class sizes are not
President Trump's
coincidental.
attacks on higher
Ivy
education
League schools
reflect a
have
standard
a history
move
of
by
coordinating pricing
authoritarians like
practices
Vladimir
to
Putin in
avoid
Russia
competing
and
on
Viktor
cost.
Orban in Hungary.
In
This is right out of the
1958,
dictator's
MIT
playbook.
and the 8
Subdue
Ivy
and
League
control
schools
any
formed
institution
what is
that could
widely
provide a
known
check
as
on
the,
your
quote,
lying
Ivy
and your
overlap
corruption.
group.
Prevent
The cartel
any
to fix
possibility of
prices.
opposition and dissent
These
from
schools
forming
agreed to
against
use
the
a shared
autocrat
formula
and his regime.
for calculating
Clear a
financial
path for
aid,
the agents
ensuring
of
students admitted
propaganda
to
and
multiple
disinformation
schools would
and
pay the same
destroy the
price,
institutions
no matter
that have
where
given
they
us
went.
great advances in
1989,
scientific
the
discovery and
Department of
intellectual
Justice began
inquiry,
investigating
as
these
Mr. Nadler
practices
points out.
and ultimately
J.D. Vance gave the
filed
whole
an
game away,
antitrust
by the way,
lawsuit.
when he
By
repeatedly
1993,
quoted
all
Richard
9
Nixon
schools
to
had
say,
settled.
the professors are the
In
enemy.
response, Congress
Nixon
adopted
said, the
Section
professors are the enemy.
568
Write that
of the
on the
Improving
blackboard 100
America's
times
Schools Act
and never
of
forget it.
1994,
Department of Education
granting
Secretary Linda
colleges an
McMahon
antitrust
ominously warned,
exemption,
if schools want to
provided
continue to do
they did
research,
not
they
consider
must
students'
fall in
ability to
line with
pay
the
while
administration
making admission
and its goals. They
decisions.
must be, quote, in sync with the
1999, elite schools
administration
formed a
and
new
what the
cartel,
administration
the
is trying to
568
accomplish. That's a
President's Working
federal
Group.
government
The goal was the same,
takeover
to
of
create
every
a
private
shared
and
financial
public
aid
university
formula
and college in America.
not compete
Now,
for
Harvard has
students
stood up
based on
to
price.
the administration's
Even with a
attempted
legal
hostile
exemption,
takeover,
these elite
rejecting
schools
its
still chose
blatantly
profit and
unconstitutional
prestige
demands to
over
control
access
its governance,
and
its
fairness.
curriculum, and the ideology of
2022,
of its
former
faculty and
students
students.
sued many of the
In
Ivy League
response, the
schools
administration
for
has
colluding on
come after the
financial aid
university's
formulas
research
that favored
contracts
wealthy
and
applicants.
grants, and more recently, even
In
its
one
ability to
internal document
enroll foreign
uncovered through
students,
Discovery,
only
the
to be
college
shut
administrator
down by the
complained
courts.
about not being able
and
to
not
find enough qualified students
left-wing rogue
with
Democrat
well-off
judges,
parents
but
to
Republican
pay
judges
the
too,
high sticker
for
prices.
violating the
She
university's
said,
First
quote,
Amendment rights.
"Sure
We've
hope
got
the wealthy
academic
next
freedom
year
in
raise
America
a
under
few
the
more
First
smart
Amendment.
kids.
And now the Trump administration
Ivy League
ridiculously
schools
threatens
can
to
maximize
come
the
after
price
universities'
paid by each
tax-exempt
student using
status. They
detailed
want to
financial
revoke
data
Harvard's
collected through
tax-exempt
the College
status,
Scholarship
and they've
Services
asked
Profile
all federal
or the
agencies to
CSS
cancel
profile.
all of the contracts
It is
they
a
have with Harvard
comprehensive
to get
financial
the
aid
work of
form
the American
that
people
most
done.
colleges do not require.
Contracted work.
The CSS
Trump is
profile
losing in
gives these
court
schools
every day,
access
and
to
Harvard is
sensitive
winning
information,
as it
including
stands up
family
for
home
academic freedom
ownership,
and its right to make
savings, and
scientific and
retirement
academic
accounts,
progress.
and more.
And hundreds
With that
of colleges
information,
and
they can
universities across the
determine how
country
much a
are
prospective
standing
student's
with
family
Harvard.
can
DHS
apparently
head
afford
Kristi
to
Noem
pay
has said that
and
its
then
actions
charge
against
them that
Harvard
amount.
should serve as a warning to all
Despite
universities
valuing their
and all
degrees
academic
at nearly
institutions.
$400,000,
After Trump canceled more than 1.5
having multi-billion
billion in
dollar
research grants,
endowments and
we
receiving
know that
billions
state universities and
more in
community
taxpayer
colleges
funding,
have been
these schools don't
hit
prioritize
hard.
accessibility
At smaller
or
schools,
quality of
researchers
education.
are going to lose their
They
jobs,
prioritize
labs will
profit
close, and
and
important
prestige.
work will go undone.
And even though the Ivy League
Our
schools
Republican
no longer
colleagues
have an
no
antitrust
interest in making
exemption
higher
to
ed more
coordinate on
accessible
pricing,
and more affordable.
tuition
In their big,
continues to
beautiful bill,
skyrocket.
they're cutting
By setting
programs
the industry
that help
standard
students
for
pay for
tuition,
college.
the Ivy
All to
League
fund their
creates an
tax
umbrella
cuts
effect
for the
that
wealthiest
allows other
Americans.
colleges to
Those
charge
cuts
more
to
than they
higher
could
education
in a
America
competitive
include
market.
severe limits on Pell
Today,
eligibility,
we're starting an
the end
overdue
to subsidized
conversation
loans,
about how the
and a
Ivy
host
League's
of other destructive
anti-competitive
changes
practices
that will push
may harm
college way
students,
out of reach for
taxpayers,
hundreds of
and
thousands of
ultimately our
Americans.
country's
The administration also
I want to
proposed
thank the
nearly an
witnesses again
80%
for appearing
reduction in
before us
federal
today,
work-study
and I
funding
look forward
and
to your
eliminating
input.
support for
I will
child
now
care for
recognize the
students who are
ranking member,
parents.
Mr.
What
Nadler,
world are these
for
people
his
living
opening
in?
statement.
This
Mr.
is
Chairman,
breathtaking complicity
before I
to
start
claim
my
that the
opening
Ivy League
statement,
schools are conspiring
let me,
against their students to make tuition unaffordable
mention
when
a
House
personal
Republicans are
stake in
complicit
this.
in the largest setback
I am the
in
first
access
member
to
of my
higher
family
education for working
to go to
class
college.
Americans in decades.
We didn't have much money. My
Not
father
content to
worked on a
undermine
gas
American
station.
students through these direct
And I
cuts
was
to
offered
education.
full
They're also
scholarships
proposing
by two
cutting
Ivy
$880
League
billion
colleges,
from Medicaid
Yale
and
and
$300 billion
Columbia. I
from
chose
SNAP,
Columbia,
the nation's
and I never
primary
had to
anti-hunger
pay a
program.
cent.
Do you know what happens to
Mr.
millions
Chairman,
of low-income
this
students
hearing,
who don't have
like so
health
much
care
else that we
and
have
don't
done
have
in this
enough food
committee
to
under
eat?
Republican
Most of them
control,
are going to drop
takes a
out of
serious
school.
issue
Today's
and
hearing
uses it as
just
little more than an
regurgitates
excuse
the MAGA
to
agenda,
launch a decidedly
persecute and punish
unserious
anyone
so-called
who refuses
investigation.
to submit to Donald Trump's
Let's be clear.
right-wing
The
ideological
cost of
agenda
tuition at
or
many
gets in the
colleges
way
and
of their plan to
universities,
fund tax
not
cuts
just
for
Ivy
the
League
wealthiest Americans on the
institutions,
backs
is
of
too high
everybody else.
and
It
is
is a
unaffordable
cruel,
for too many
dangerous
families.
program, and it's got
But the same
nothing to
Republicans
do
who
with
today
antitrust
claim to be
law.
concerned
I yield
about the
back.
ability of students and their
Gentleman
families
yields
to
back
afford
without
college
objection.
tuition.
All other opening
Proudly cast
statements
their
will be
votes
included in the record.
2 weeks ago
We'll now introduce
for a
today's
budget
witnesses.
reconciliation
Dr.
bill
Preston
that would take
Cooper.
direct
Dr.
aim
Cooper
at student
is a senior
loan
fellow at the
programs
American
and other
Enterprise
vital
Institute,
student aid.
where his work focuses on higher
If they
education,
really cared
student
about
loans,
consumer
and higher
prices,
education reform.
they would not
He previously
undermine the
served
ability
as
of all
a senior
students,
fellow
especially
in higher
low-income
education
students, to
policy at the
access and
Foundation for
afford
Research
higher
on
education.
Equal Opportunity,
They
a
would not make
research
cuts to
analyst
Pell
at
Grants
AEI,
that would
and
reduce
as a
or
policy
eliminate
analyst
access
at
for up
the
to 4
Manhattan
million
Institute
students.
for Policy
They would not cut
Research.
student loan subsidies,
Next,
raising costs for
Mr.
an
Alex
average
Shea.
borrower
Mr.
by up
Shea
to
is a rising
$200 a
junior
month.
at Brown
They would
University,
not make
where he
student loan
studies
repayments
computer
even more
science and
difficult
economics.
and push
He's
more
also a
students
journalist,
into the predatory
serving as a
private
contributing
loan market.
opinion writer
And they
for
would
the
not
Boston
include
Globe
devastating cuts to
and
Medicaid,
as the publisher
which would
of the
deprive
Brown
roughly
Spectator.
3.4 million low-income
Mr.
students
Scott Martin.
of much
Mr. Martin
needed
is a
health care.
partner and
But
co-chair of
Republicans
the
showed us very
Antitrust
clearly
Practice Group
that their priority is tax
Excuse me,
cuts for
at
billionaires,
Haltfield LLP.
not affordable higher
He has spent more
education.
than 25 years
So it
in
is a
civil
little difficult to
litigation,
take their
and his
concerns
practice
seriously
specializes in
today.
pricing, distribution,
This hearing
and other
also
competition
comes
issues.
in the context of the Trump administration's all-out
Miss
assault on
Julie
education
Margaretta Morgan.
and research
Ms. Morgan
at
is the
colleges and
president
universities
of the
across the
Century
country,
Foundation,
and particularly
a progressive think
at
tank.
Ivy League and
She
other
previously
elite
served as the
universities.
Associated Director of Research,
The administration has
Monitoring,
slashed
and
billions of
Regulations at
dollars
the
in
Consumer
research grants to
Financial
universities,
Protection Bureau.
which will set back
We
technological
welcome our
innovation and
witnesses and
medical
thank them for
advances
appearing today.
by decades.
We will begin by
Not to
swearing you you in. Would
harming
you please
our economic
rise and
growth.
raise your right hand?
At the same time, they are revoking student visas and sending an unmistakable message to prospective students around the globe that they are
Do you
not
swear or
welcome.
affirm under penalty
The
of
result is
perjury
that the
that the
brightest minds
testimony
in the
you are
world,
about to give is
once
true and
flocked
correct
to
to the
this
best of
country,
your knowledge,
will now look to bring their
information,
brains
and belief?
and talents
So help you
elsewhere.
God.
But this attack on higher
Let
education
the record reflect
has an
that the
even more
witnesses have
sinister
answered
purpose.
in the affirmative.
Its real target
Thank
is
you, and you
academic
can be
freedom.
seated.
Taking a page from the authoritarian playbook,
Please
The Trump
know that your written
administration is
testimony
using
will be
every tool
entered
at
into the
its
record in its
disposal
entirety.
in a pressure
Accordingly,
campaign
we ask
to
that you
impose its
summarize your
ideology
testimony
on
in 5
independent
minutes.
academic
And
institutions
Dr. Cooper,
and to
you may
bend them
begin.
into submission. And unfortunately,
Good morning, Chairman
they have a willing
Fitzgerald,
partner
Chairman
in the
Jordan,
Republicans
Ranking
on
Member
the
Raskin,
Judiciary
and
Committee.
Ranking Member Nadler,
Instead
and
of
distinguished
using their
members of the
powers
subcommittee.
legislators
Thank
to
you
make
for the
education
opportunity to
cheaper,
testify today
more
on the
accessible,
enrollment and pricing
easier to
practices
pay
of
off
Ivy
for all
League
Americans.
universities. My
Republicans
name is
are
Preston
using the
Cooper,
power of this
and I'm a
committee
senior fellow
to
focusing
aid
on
and
the
abet
economics of higher
President Trump's
education at the
ideological
American
war
Enterprise Institute.
against the very narrow slice
The 8
of higher
institutions
ed
of the Ivy League
institutions.
show many hallmarks
How
of
absurdly narrow
anti-competitive
is their
behavior.
focus?
Most Ivy League
They are targeting
institutions
8
severely
schools
limit
out of about
undergraduate admissions,
4,000
turning away
in the
thousands
United
of qualified
States.
applicants.
That amounts to
The
a
schools
focus
charge
upon
among
less
the
than
highest
one-half of
tuition prices in
1%
the country
of the
and are
American
less likely to
undergraduate
provide financial
population.
aid than other private
While
institutions.
President Trump threatens
At the same
individual
time,
schools
Ivy League
with cuts
universities
for not
enjoy
adhering to his
significant surplus
ideology,
that funds high
they are
levels
using
of
the power and
institutional
resources of this
expenditures,
committee
administrative
to pursue
bloat,
yet
and
another empty
seven-figure salaries
antitrust
for
theory
some college
so
presidents.
that they can bully their political targets.
Some Ivy League universities
Sadly,
recently
this
enjoyed an
follows
exemption
a
from
familiar
antitrust
pattern.
law, provided they
Last
admitted
Congress,
students on a
this
need-blind
subcommittee
basis.
unleashed
In
baseless
2022,
antitrust
a group of students filed a
investigations
class action
designed to
lawsuit against
undermine the
17
free
elite
speech
universities,
rights
including several Ivies,
of
alleging that
advertisers and
admissions are
investors
not actually
that held views
need-blind.
disfavored by
Most
the
of these
majority.
schools eventually settled the lawsuit for a collective $320
When
million.
advertisers made the
Another
reasonable
lawsuit was
determination
filed in
that they did
2024,
not want their
alleging that
brands
elite universities have
associated with
continued to
extremist
coordinate their
views and
pricing
hate
decisions
speech
even
on
after
social
the
media
antitrust
platforms.
exemption expired.
Republicans use the flawed
My
antitrust
testimony
theory
does not take a
to
position
justify
on
a
whether Ivy
campaign
League
to threaten
universities
and
are
intimidate
coordinating their
them
pricing
into
decisions
abandoning
or whether they are in
abandoning
violation
their
of federal
efforts at
antitrust law.
responsible advertising.
But the enrollment,
When
pricing, and
investors
spending
threaten the
practices
profits
of
of
the
big
Ivy
oil and
League
gas
raise some red
companies
flags.
by considering the
Classic
risks
cartels limit
that climate
supply
change
in order to
poses to
drive
our
up
economic
prices
future,
and profits,
the
and we
committee
observe
rushed
a
to the
version of this
defense of their
happening among
corporate
Ivy
allies
League schools.
with another hollow antitrust
Let's start with
investigation.
restrictions on supply, a
And now
fundamental
today,
aspect of
they
cartel
return
behavior.
to the same tired
Harvard
playbook,
College admitted about
using the power of
2,200
this
students to
committee
join the class
to
of
support the Trump
1982.
administration's
Due to
efforts
population
to target
increases and higher rates of
academic
overall college
institutions.
attendance,
After
one
having
might
launched an
expect that number to
overbroad
grow.
fishing expedition
Instead,
against
Harvard
Ivy
admitted
League
just over
universities,
1,900
they're now
students to
holding
join its
hearings
class of
today
2028.
to justify these
Unlike
efforts
most
as
other private
harassment
colleges,
and intimidation.
Ivy League universities have
As I
mostly
noted at
not
the
increased
outset,
admissions
there
to
are real
match rising
concerns
demand.
when it comes to the cost of
Instead,
tuition
the schools
at
have opted to
colleges and
become more
universities.
selective, with
If
the
there is
average
indeed
Ivy League
collusion among
admissions
the Ivy
rate
League
falling from
schools,
15% in
enforcement by our
2002
antitrust
to just
agencies,
5% in
the Federal Trade
2022.
Commission, and the Department of
As
Justice
student
is the
demand
answer.
rises, but Ivy
Not a
League
partisan
institutions
probe
keep
that
admissions
merely
relatively
serves as
flat.
another
The
broadside
obvious
against
result is
education
upward
in
pressure
America
on prices.
under President
The
Trump.
annual price of tuition and
There is
fees
much
at
we
Ivy
could do
League
together to
universities
bring down the
range
cost of
between
tuition
$59,000
and
and
broaden access to education.
$69,000 in the previous academic
Unfortunately,
year.
Republicans
That's
would
between
rather slash
56%
student
and
loans,
82%
pay
higher
for
than the average for private
tax
colleges.
cuts for billionaires,
Ivy
while
League students
threatening
are also less
universities that
likely
do
to
not
receive
bend to
financial
Donald
aid,
Trump's will.
while 84% of
Unfortunately,
students
there
at
is one clear
non-Ivy
loser
colleges
in the
enjoy a
Republican
discount
war
off
on
the sticker
science and
price.
education.
The share of Ivy
It
League
is the
students
students they
receiving
claim
institutional
to
financial
support,
aid is
and I
just
should add,
52%.
the public that benefits from
In a
scientific
traditional
and medical
cartel,
discoveries
restricted
that
supply
will
and
not
higher
now happen
prices
in the
enable
United States.
monopoly-like profits.
I appreciate our
While
witnesses
nonprofit
for appearing
universities
today.
don't earn
I look
profits in the
forward to
traditional
hearing from
sense,
them, and I
they
yield
still
back the
enjoy
balance of my
surplus
time.
revenues. Ivy
Gentlemen,
League
yields back.
universities
I now
spend an
recognize
average of
Chairman of the full committee, Mr.
$126,000
Jordan, for
per
his
full-time
opening.
Thank you,
equivalent
Mr. Chairman.
student,
So first,
compared
they
to just
set the
$35,000
same
for the
general
average private
price.
college. These high
Then,
levels of
second, they
spending fuel a
demand
vast
large amounts of
administrative
information from the
bureaucracy.
student and their
The average
family
Ivy League institution
for each
employs
student, and they
one
squeeze every
non-instructional
dime they
staffer for
can out of
every
that
2
family
students, compared to
for
one staffer
tuition.
for every 6
And then
students at other
third, they
private
limit class
colleges.
size. So they
All
agree
of
on
this
price,
matters
they perfect
because
price
Ivy League
discriminate, and they limit
institutions have
output.
an outsized impact
That's
on
about
the
as
future of America.
anti-competitive behavior
Ivy
as you
League
can
graduates
get.
are vastly
And then with this
overrepresented among
windfall
elites
of
in
money
business,
they get,
politics,
perfect
and
price
media.
discrimination,
A
collusion
group
on
of
the price,
institutions
limiting
which
the
limits
class
enrollments
size
and
at
charges
the
excessive prices
institution. There's a
denies
windfall of money
opportunity
they
to
get from
thousands of
students
students,
and their
particularly
families and the
middle-class
government,
students
the
with strong strong
taxpayers.
academic qualifications
They hire an
who face an
unbelievable amount of
unfairly low
administrators.
likelihood of admission
Mr. Shea
today.
has pointed that out.
The surplus revenues
Such a
that Ivy
deal.
League institutions
Such a
currently
deal for
enjoy
taxpayers
fuel
and families.
administrative bloat,
That's
but they
what's
could
going
instead
on.
be used to
And
create
thank
more
goodness
seats
the
for
chairman's
qualified
having a hearing
applicants.
on this.
The market
It's ridiculous,
for elite
and
education
everyone knows
bears
it.
many of the
Not to
telltale
mention
signs
all
of
the crazy things
anti-competitive
we saw
behavior.
and witnessed at these
Whether it meets the legal
institutions over the
definition
last
of a
few
cartel
years.
is an open
All
question,
kinds of crazy
but it
protests
unambiguously
taking over
leaves
buildings,
students and society
anti-Semitic
worse
behavior.
off.
I mean, not
Thank
to
you for
mention
your
all that.
attention, and I look forward
That's
to your
what's
questions.
going on, and the ranking member of the subcommittee says we're wasting our time.
Thank
You've
you,
got to be
Dr.
kidding
Cooper.
me.
We'll now recognize
Taxpayers
Mr.
appreciate
Martin
that their tax
for
money
5
actually is
minutes.
used in the right way, not like it's being used at these institutions. So again, I want to thank the chairman for this hearing. I look forward to our witnesses and thank
you.
them.
Chairman
for being
Jordan,
present
Ranking
today
Member
and
Raskin,
testifying. With that, I
Chair
yield back.
Fitzgerald, Ranking
Gentleman
Member
yields
Nadler,
back. I now recognize
distinguished members
the
of the
ranking member of
subcommittee.
the full committee.
Thank you
Mr.
for
Raskin,
extending
for
an
his opening
invitation to
statement.
testify
Thank you very
today.
much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our witnesses for
My name is Scott
joining
Martin.
us
I'm an
today.
attorney whose work
Republicans
is focused
convened us
on
in the middle of the
antitrust
night
litigation
a
for
couple
more than
weeks
30
ago to
years.
pass their billionaire tax
That
break
includes
bill,
more than 2
which
decades
even
primarily
Elon
spent on
Musk,
defense work,
their great hero, now
and the
calls
past
a
10 years
disgusting
principally litigating on behalf of
abomination.
plaintiffs.
Another
I'm
class
also an
war
author and
tax
co-editor
scam
of
that will not
multi-volume
only throw
antitrust
14
treatise.
million
I
Americans
care
off of
deeply
their
about the
Medicaid,
benefits
but
of
increase the
competition
national
and
debt
free
by
markets,
$3
which is a
trillion.
truly bipartisan
In
goal,
case our
as well
friends
as
missed it,
active
Elon
but
Musk, who
fair
we've been
enforcement
praising
of our
since
nation's
this
antitrust
administration
laws.
began,
As the
has a
members of the
message for you
subcommittee
today.
know, the
Shame
antitrust
on
laws
you.
address both
Shame
unilateral
on those who
conduct
voted
and
for it.
competitive
You
acts
know you
undertaken by a
did
single actor
wrong,
with market power
says Elon Musk.
and concerted
So
conduct,
I was pleasantly
particularly when the
surprised
latter
to see we were
involves
going to have a
direct
hearing
or
on
horizontal
antitrust
competitors.
because there used
Most
to be
of my remarks
Republicans
will be
like
directed
progressive
to the
trust
latter
buster Teddy
as an area of
Roosevelt,
concern
who
regarding
actually
higher
believed in
education
protecting the American
historically.
people against
Principally,
price-fixing
the potential for
conspiracies,
cartel activity,
monopoly,
which the
and
United
runaway
States Supreme
corporate
Court
power. I
has
thought
labeled
perhaps,
the
Mr.
supreme
Chairman,
evil
we could get
of
together to
antitrust.
protect our
In
personal
testifying
data,
today, I
to
make no
investigate
prejudgment about
alleged
any current
monopolization
conduct,
of live
nor
events
does my law
tickets,
firm represent
and
a
lower
party in the
prices on
cases I'll
everything
discuss.
from eggs and
Indeed,
other
the hope of
groceries
antitrust
to
lawyers
credit
is
card
always
junk
that free
fees,
markets
which have been
are operating
soaring under the
properly,
Trump
and that
administration,
unlawful conduct
despite his
is
promise
not
that he would
interfering with
lower the
that.
price of eggs
There are several
and everything
reasons
else on
here
day
for
one.
heightened
Silly me.
vigilance to protect
Like
and
everything
encourage
else, antitrust
robust
in the hands of our
competition
friends
in higher
is
education.
just one more
First,
chance to attack
as members of the
America's
subcommittee, as well as
colleges
many
and
American
universities
students and parents
that
know,
refuse to
the price of higher
surrender
education,
control
specifically
to that
for private
luminary
schools,
academic
has
scholar
outpaced
Donald
the rate of
Trump,
inflation.
who wants the federal government
Since I was
to
in
take
college,
over
the
faculty
consumer price
hiring,
index has inflated
student
the dollar by a
admissions,
factor of
and
3,
academic
but
affairs
tuition
at
prices
every
at the most
university
selective
in America.
institutions in particular
And I don't even
have
know why
gone up
Donald Trump's
on the
so
order
mad
of
at Harvard. They
sevenfold.
let in his son-in-law,
Meanwhile,
Jared
output in
Kushner,
terms of class
after the
size
Kushner
has not
family
kept pace
donated
with population growth.
$500,000
This is true despite
to get
increased
him in,
demand and
just like
increasing
Trump
multi-billion-dollar
pardoned Kushner's
endowments.
father,
Common
Charles,
sense
a major Trump donor
begs the
who's our new
question
ambassador
whether
to France,
such a market
for
is
his
working
multiple
properly.
convictions for tax
Second,
evasion
the somewhat
and witness
cloistered nature of
tampering.
these
Now that would
institutions,
be a
their
worthwhile
nonprofit
hearing, Mr.
status,
Chairman,
not to be
how
confused with
wealthy
their massive
people like the
endowments,
Kushners and the
in a
Trumps
belief of which I
buy
am
their
not
way
questioning
in
the
to
sincerity,
America's
but
elite
they are engaged in
institutions, as
noble
Donald
work of
Trump
the
calls
advancement
them.
of knowledge
But
may create
antitrust
an
is now
atmosphere
just a weapon of
suggesting that
political attack,
relaxation of rules of
not
competition
economic analysis.
would be appropriate
When
for this
businesses
industry.
advocate
Not
sustainable
so.
investing,
Most legal
House
scholars will
Republicans
tell you
accuse
not
them
only that
of
antitrust
violating
exemptions
antitrust.
are rare
When consumers
and
want to
rightly so,
exercise the right to
but also
boycott,
that special sectoral
Republicans
rules
accuse
and
them of
regulation
violating
have at best a
antitrust.
mixed track record
Gee, if you don't
in our
support their
nation.
monstrous, ugly tax
In a
break
different
bill
higher
for
education
billionaires,
context,
they'll accuse
my
you
law
of
firm brought
violating
the O'Bannon
antitrust.
case to
We'll probably
challenge
be having a hearing
NCQA
on how
restraints
Elon
on
Musk is
college
now
athletes.
violating
That
antitrust
marketplace
since he's
has
turned
flourished,
against
and the
Donald
sky
Trump
has not
and
fallen.
their appalling
And
bill.
third,
So
there are
today
numerous
they're accusing
markers
8
here familiar
universities
to antitrust
who represent
practitioners that
less
this is a
than
market
1/2
ripe for
of
distortion by
1%
collusion.
of
Among other
undergraduate
things,
students
this
in the
is a somewhat
entire market
concentrated
across
industry
America
with
of engaging
relatively
in some completely
few highly
vague and
selective
massive
institutions as
antitrust
participants.
conspiracy.
There are numerous
Republicans actually
opportunities for
trotted
those
out
entities to
this
collude, whether
pathetically
directly,
weak theory in the
such as at
first
meetings
Trump
of
administration,
university
and of
presidents,
course
or
no antitrust
facilitated
scholars took
through
it seriously,
intermediaries
and
such as the
even their
College
own
Board.
Department of
And
Justice
there are, of course,
didn't do
exceptionally
anything
high
with it.
barriers to
They
entry
control the
into the
antitrust
market.
division again. Why
As
do
I
they need
mentioned,
another
by way
hearing
of
in this
context,
committee?
this
Why
industry
don't
has
they
been the
just bring their
subject of
case if there's a
investigations
case?
and
They've got
litigation,
the power.
raising
That's what they've been
competition
talking
concerns
about.
in the
Look,
past on
this
issues
is pure power
ranging from no-poach
politics.
agreements concerning
President Trump's
graduate school
attacks on higher
faculty members,
education
to
reflect a
monopolization
standard
of markets
move
and
by
college for college
authoritarians like
bookstore
Vladimir
sales
Putin in
and
Russia
local housing.
and Viktor Orban
Common
in
application
Hungary.
used
This
by
is
over
right out of the
1,000
dictator's
colleges and
playbook.
universities throughout the
Subdue and
United States
control
also
any
has been the
institution
subject
that
of a
could
private
provide try to
antitrust
check
action
on your
ultimately
lying
settled.
and your corruption,
And perhaps most
prevent
pertinent,
any
the
possibility of
subcommittee here,
opposition and dissent
in
from
1989, as
forming
you've heard,
against the
the DOJ
autocrat
filed
and
a
his
civil
regime.
antitrust
Clear a
case
path
against a
for
group
the
of
agents
universities
of
alleged to have
propaganda and
employed the same analysis
disinformation and
to
destroy
compute
the
family
institutions
contributions
that have
toward the
given us
cost of
great
attendance for
advances in
purposes of
scientific
collectively
discovery and
determining
intellectual
financial
inquiry,
assistance
as
offered
Mr.
to
Nadler
commonly
points
admitted
out.
students.
J.D. Vance
That
gave the
case
whole
resulted
game
in
away,
a
by the
10-year
way, when
consent
he
decree in
repeatedly
1991,
quoted Richard
under
Nixon
which
to
those
say, the
universities
professors are the
committed not to
enemy.
agree on
Nixon
student
said, the
financial
professors
aid.
are the enemy.
And
Write that on the
subsequently to
blackboard 100
congressional
times
passage
and never
of the
forget
so-called
it.
568
Department of Education
exemption.
Secretary Linda McMahon ominously
Permitting
warned,
colleges
if
to
schools
formulate
want to
common
continue to
approaches
do
to
research,
awarding
they must
financial aid,
fall in line
provided
with the
they strictly
administration
adhered
and its
to need
goals. They
blind
must be, quote,
admissions.
in sync with the
568
administration administration
expired
and what
on
the
September 30,
administration is trying to
2022, and
accomplish.
was
That's
not
a
renewed.
federal
However,
government
as you know, current and former
takeover of
college
every
students allege
private and
in a
public
class action
university
filed in
and college in
2022
America.
that
Now,
members of
Harvard
the
has stood up
568 President's
to the
Group
administration's
of 17 top private
attempted
colleges and
hostile
universities
takeover,
have
rejecting
conspired
its
to eliminate
blatantly
competition
unconstitutional
among them
demands
for
to
financial
control
aid.
its governance,
To date,
its curriculum,
12 of those
and the
17
ideology
schools have
of its
resolved the
faculty and
lawsuit
students.
in settlements
response, the
totaling
administration
approximately
has come after the
$320 million.
university's research contracts
I thank you again
and grants,
for
and
your
more
attention
recently,
and your
even its
vigilance
ability to
in this
enroll
regard.
foreign students,
Thank you, Mr.
only
Martin.
to be shut
Mr.
down
Shea,
by the
you may
courts
begin.
and not
Chairman
left-wing
Fitzgerald,
rogue
Ranking Member
Democrat
Nadler,
judges, but Republican
Chairman
judges
Jordan,
too, for
Ranking
violating
Member
the university's
Raskin,
First
thank
Amendment
you for
rights.
inviting me
We've
to
got
appear before you
academic
today.
freedom
My
in
name is
America
Alex
under
Shea,
the First
and I'm a
Amendment.
rising junior at
And now
Brown
the Trump
University,
administration
one of the most
ridiculously threatens
exclusive
to come after
institutions
the
in the
university's
world.
tax
But I'm
exempt
not here to
status.
glorify the Ivy
They
League.
want to
I'm here to
revoke
warn
Harvard's
you.
tax
The
exempt
promise of
status.
American higher education,
And they've asked all
of
federal
opportunity
agencies
through
to cancel
meritocracy
all of the
is under
contracts
attack.
they have with
I'm a
Harvard
legacy
to
student
get
at Brown.
the work of
I
the
went to a
American
prep
people
school that
done.
feeds to the Ivy League.
Con-
My parents are
contracted
doctors
work.
who can
But
afford
Trump is losing in court every day,
$93,000 a year
and Harvard
sticker
is
price.
winning
In
as
other
it
words,
stands up for
I'm
academic
exactly
freedom
who the
and
Ivy
its
League
right to
was
make
built for.
scientific and
But
academic
what about the kids who
progress.
weren't born on third
And
base?
hundreds of
Statistically
colleges and
speaking,
universities
for a
across
smart
the
kid
country
from a poor
are
family,
standing
an Ivy
with
League
Harvard.
degree can power
DHS
their
head
ascent to
Kristi
the upper
Noem
income
said that its
brackets better
actions
than
against
anything
Harvard
else.
should serve
That's
as
the
a
American
warning
dream.
to all
But
universities
today, that
and all
dream is now
academic
a luxury
institutions.
good.
After Trump canceled more than
According to the New York
1.5
Times,
billion
at
in
Brown,
research grants,
the median
we
student's
know
family makes
that
over
state universities and
$200,000 a
community
year.
colleges
Half the
have
student
been
body comes
have
from the
been
top
hit
5% of
hard.
earners.
At
And
smaller
research by
schools,
Brown's own professor,
researchers are
John
going to lose
Friedman,
their
shows
jobs,
that even
labs
equally
will close,
qualified
and
low-income
important work
students are
will
vastly
go
underrepresented.
undone. Our Republican
At this very
colleagues
moment,
have
the
no
American
interest in
people are
making
tightening their
higher ed
belts,
more accessible
and Brown
and more
is raising
affordable.
tuition
In their big,
to
beautiful
beyond
bill,
$90,000
they're
a
cutting
year.
programs
And
that
even
help
while
students
charging
pay for
students
college,
the price of a luxury
all to
car,
fund their tax
Brown is on
cuts
track to run
for
a
the
$46
wealthiest
million
Americans.
deficit this
Those
year.
cuts
Where's all the
to
money
higher
going?
education in America
I'll tell you
include
where it's going. It's going
severe
into
limits on
an
Pell
empire of
eligibility,
administrative
the
bloat
end to
and
subsidized
bureaucracy.
loans, and a
Brown
host of other
employs
destructive changes that will
3,805
push college
full-time
way out
non-instructional
of reach
staff
for
for just
hundreds of thousands of
7,229
Americans.
undergrads.
The administration
That's one
also proposed
administrator for every
nearly
two
an
students.
80%
This
reduction in
isn't
federal
education.
work-study funding
This is bloat,
and eliminating
paid for
support
on the backs
for
of students and
childcare
families
for
who are
students
mortgaging
who are
their futures
parents.
for a shot at a
What
better
world
life.
are these people living
Meanwhile,
in?
Grace Calhoun,
This is
Brown's athletic
breathtaking
director,
duplicity
earns over $1
to
million.
claim that the Ivy League
A
schools are
household assistant
conspiring
on payroll
against
tends
their
to university
students to make
President
tuition
Christina Paxson.
unaffordable
And
when
when
House
budget cuts are
Republicans
made,
are
these
complicit in the
expenses
largest
stay
setback
while the student
in
experience
access to
deteriorates.
higher
My
education
dorm
for
floods
working
when it
class
rains, and
Americans
the burger
in
patties in our dining
decades.
hall have
Not
been replaced by
content
an
to undermine
unappetizing
American students
beef mushroom
through these
blend.
direct cuts to
The idea
education,
that Brown's
they're also
administration can be
proposing
streamlined isn't
cutting
conjecture.
$880
We didn't
billion
used to have
from
these many
Medicaid
administrators.
and $300
Across the
billion
nation,
from
the
SNAP,
number of
the
university
nation's primary
administrators has risen by
anti-hunger program.
162%
Do you know
in
what
recent
happens to
decades.
millions of
It's no
low-income
coincidence
students
that
who don't have
correspondingly,
health
the
care
cost of
and don't
education
have
has risen
enough food to eat
181%.
and to fund
I recently
tax
learned
cuts
of a
for
brilliant
the
young
wealthiest
man from
Americans on
Pensacola,
the
Florida,
backs of
who
everybody
got
else.
into Brown
It
but
is
was
a
forced to
cruel,
walk away because the
dangerous
financial aid
program, and
wasn't
it's
enough.
got nothing to
Brown
do
says
with
it meets
antitrust
100%
law.
of demonstrated
I yield back.
need, but Brown gets to decide
Gentleman
what
yields
that need
back
is.
without objection.
Middle-class
All other
students in
opening
particular
statements
suffer
will be
from these
included in the
policies,
record.
earning
We'll
too
now
much to
introduce
qualify
today's
for generous
witnesses.
scholarships,
Dr.
but not
Preston
enough to go to
Cooper.
Brown
Dr.
without straddling
Cooper
themselves
is
with
a senior
significant
fellow at
amounts
the
of
American
debt.
Enterprise Institute,
And let's not forget
where his
that
work
Brown is
focuses
one of
on
several
higher
Ivy League
education,
schools
student
that settled a
loans,
federal
and higher
antitrust lawsuit
education
last year
reform.
for allegedly
He
colluding
previously
to suppress
served
financial
as
aid
a
offers.
senior fellow
I'm a reporter
in
for the Brown
higher
Spectator,
education
and
policy
to
at the
document this
Foundation
problem,
for
I created a
Research
website
on
called
Equal
Vote at Brown
Opportunity, a research analyst
that used
at
AI to
AEI,
assess whether each
and as a
administrative
policy
role was
analyst
actually
at
necessary.
the Manhattan
I sent
Institute
each administrative
for Policy
employee a Doge-style
Research.
email to ask them,
Next,
what do you do all
Mr.
day?
Alex Shea.
Instead of
Mr.
answering
O'Shea is a
Brown's
rising
response was
junior
retaliation.
at Brown
My social
University,
security number was
where he
leaked.
studies
Our
computer
website was
science and
hacked.
economics.
And Associate
He's
Dean
also a
Kirsten
journalist,
Wolf launched a
serving
disciplinary
as a
investigation
contributing
into a
opinion
litany of
writer
baseless
for the
charges,
Boston
such as
Globe
emotional harm.
and as the
When they couldn't get
publisher
me,
of the
they charged
Brown
every single
Spectator.
board member of the Brown Spectator.
Mr. Scott
an
Martin,
unprecedented
Mr.
attack
Martin is
on
a
senior
partner
journalism.
and
But we
co-chair
refused
of
to
the
back down
Antitrust
when we
Practice
won our
Group.
hearings. There was no
Excuse me,
misconduct,
at
only
Hallfield
exposure,
LLP.
and that's what Brown
He has
feared the
spent more
most.
than 25
This
years in
committee has a
civil
responsibility,
litigation,
not
and his
just to
practice
investigate
specializes in
Ivy
pricing,
League antitrust
distribution,
violations,
and
but to
other
reclaim the American
competition
dream
issues.
from those who have twisted it into a racket.
Miss
I call on you
Julie
today to
Margaretta
subpoena
Morgan.
Brown's president,
Ms. Morgan is
Christina
the president
Paxson, and ask
of the
her
Century
why Brown
Foundation,
costs
a progressive think
$92,000 a
tank.
year.
She
The
previously
American
served
dream
as
isn't
the
just for the
Associate
legacies,
Director of
the coastal
Research,
elites, or the
Monitoring,
children
and
of privilege.
Regulations at the
It
Consumer
belongs to the kid in
Financial
rural Kansas
Protection
with a
Bureau.
4.0 GPA.
We
the
welcome
first
our
gen student
witnesses
working a
and
night
thank
shift.
them for
The
appearing
families
today.
who did
We
everything
will
right
begin
and
by
still got
swearing you
priced
in.
out.
Would you
They
please
deserve a
rise
seat
and
at the
raise your
table.
right hand?
They deserve a shot at making it big. Their American dreams matter too. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome your questions.
Do you swear or Thank you, affirm Mr. under Shea. penalty of
Dr.
perjury
Morgan,
that
you
the
may
testimony you are about to
Good morning,
give is
Chairman
true and
Fitzgerald,
correct to the
Ranking
best of your
Member
knowledge,
Nadler, and members of the
information,
subcommittee.
and
Thank
belief?
you for the
So
opportunity to
help you
testify
God.
at this hearing. The rising cost of college
the record
beyond
reflect
high
that the
school in
witnesses
this
have
country is a
answered in the
major
affirmative.
concern for many American
Thank you, and
families.
you can be seated.
Whether they're looking at an associate's degree in nursing, a vocational certificate to
Please
become
know
an
that your
HVAC
written
technician,
testimony
or
will
a
be
four-year
entered
degree
into
in
the record in
business,
its
Americans
entirety.
looking to get ahead in the
Accordingly,
job
we
market
ask
are
that you
facing high
summarize your
tuition bills.
testimony
And most
in
families
5
are forced
minutes.
to cope by
And
taking
Dr.
on student
Cooper,
loan debt
you
that
may
becomes a
begin.
lifelong burden. I applaud the
Good morning,
committee's
Chairman
interest in the cost
Fitzgerald,
of higher
Chairman
education.
Jordan,
However, the
Ranking
focus
Member
of this
Raskin,
inquiry
and
is
Ranking Member
misplaced.
Nadler, and
Ivy League
distinguished members of
institutions
the
train
subcommittee.
Less than 0.4%
Thank you for the
of
opportunity to
undergraduate students
testify
in this
today
country,
on the enrollments
whereas
and
the
pricing
vast majority
practices of
students
Ivy
attend
League
public community
universities.
colleges and
My
open
name is
access
Preston
state
Cooper,
colleges.
and I am a senior fellow
Ivy League
focusing on the
admissions and
economics
tuition
of higher
practices have
education at
no
the American
effect on the
Enterprise
schools
Institute.
that most Americans attend.
The 8
Looking for a
institutions of the
solution
Ivy
to
League
college
show many
costs in the
hallmarks of
Ivy League
anti-competitive
is like
behavior.
looking for a needle in a
Most
haystack
Ivy League
while the rest of the
institutions
haystack is
severely
on
limit
fire.
undergraduate
And here's
admissions,
the latest
turning
source
away
of that
thousands
fire.
of qualified
Legislation
applicants.
approved by the
The
House of
schools charge
Representatives
among the
pays
highest
for
tuition
tax cuts
prices
for
in the
the richest
country
Americans
and are less
by
likely to
increasing
provide
the price of
financial aid than
college
other
for
private
low and
institutions.
middle-income students,
At the same
including
time,
taking away
Ivy
Pell
League
Grants from
universities
1.4
enjoy a
million
significant
Americans
surplus that
and
funds
reducing
high
them for
levels of
another 3
institutional
million.
expenditures,
The deep cuts to
administrative
Medicaid
load,
and
and
SNAP in that bill
seven-figure
will also
salaries for
likely
some college
increase
presidents.
public school tuition by
Some
squeezing
Ivy League
state
universities
budgets,
recently
as higher
enjoyed an
education will be at
exemption
the
from
top of the
antitrust
chopping
law,
block to
provided
cover
they admitted
state budget
students on a
shortfalls.
need-blind basis.
Antitrust at
In
elite colleges is
2022, a
deeply
group of
inadequate
students
for
filed a
solving the
class
problem
action
of high
lawsuit
prices
against
of college
17
in
elite
America.
universities, including
Attempting
several
to
Ivies,
leverage
alleging
antitrust
that
as a
admissions are not
global
actually
fix to college
need-blind.
pricing and admissions,
Most of
while
these schools eventually
simultaneously
settled the
slashing
lawsuit
federal
for a
support for
collective
higher
$320
education
million.
could very well result
Another
in less
lawsuit
access
was
to
filed in
college for lower and
2024,
middle-income families,
alleging that
not
elite
more.
universities have continued to
Congress
coordinate their
has
pricing
powerful tools
decisions
at hand
even after
that
the
could really
antitrust
change
exemption
the price
expired.
of college and improve the value of
My
the government's
testimony does not
investment
take a
that
position
are
on
outside
whether
this
Ivy League universities
committee's
are coordinating their
jurisdiction.
pricing
For
decisions
example,
or
the
whether
federal
they are in
government could
violation
use
of
its
federal
muscular
antitrust
role
law.
in higher
But
education
the enrollment
finance
pricing
to
and
the
spending
advantage of
practices
millions
of the
American
Ivy League
families by
raise some red
negotiating the
flags.
price of college
Classic
tuition.
cartels limit
There's
supply
strong
in order to drive
bipartisan
up
precedent
prices
for
and
this in
profits,
Medicare,
and we
where
observe
the
a
federal
version of
government
this happening
assigns
among
payment
Ivy League
rates to
schools.
healthcare services provided
Let's start
to
with
Medicare
restrictions on
beneficiaries.
supply, a fundamental
And while
aspect
Ivy
of
League
cartel
practices
behavior.
don't trickle down to
Harvard
open
College
access
admitted
schools,
about
the
2,200
predatory
students to join the
practices
class of
for-profit colleges
1982.
are definitely
Due to
trickling
population
up.
increases and
Community
higher
colleges
rates
must
of overall
contend with
college
for-profit
attendance,
schools that
one might
siphon
expect
off
that number to
students
grow.
through aggressive marketing
Instead,
and
Harvard
then leave
admitted
them
just
with
over
high debt and
1,900
low
students
earnings
to join its
potential.
class of
As Congress
2028.
looks to roll
Unlike
back
most other
regulation
private
of for-profit
colleges,
these
Ivy League
conditions will
universities
only
have mostly
worsen.
not increased
Lastly,
admissions to match rising
today's
demand.
focus on Ivy League colleges
Instead,
comes
the
after a
schools have
string
opted
of
to become more
actions by
selective,
government
with
leaders
the
aimed
average
at
Ivy
gaining
League admissions
unprecedented
rate
levels
falling
of
from
control
15%
over the
in
minutiae
2002
of
to
administration
just
at
5%
certain
in
elite
2022.
colleges. Instead of simply
As student
enforcing
demand
the law,
rises, but Ivy
federal
League
officials are
institutions
openly
keep
looking
admissions
for
relatively
any
flat.
punitive measure
The
that they
obvious
can apply
result
to
is
bend a
upward pressure
handful
on
of wealthy
prices.
elite
The annual
colleges
price
to
of
their
tuition
will.
and fees at Ivy
Federal
League
officials have put
universities
forward a
ranged
variety
between
of diffuse reasons for
$59,000
its
and
obsession with the Ivies,
$69,000 in the
but I think
previous
this line of
academic year.
attack, taken
That's
as a
between
whole,
56%
is most
and
reasonably viewed
82%
as an
higher
attempt
than
to
the
turn
average for
back the
private
clock
colleges.
and restore the role of the
Ivy League
Harvards and
students are
Yales of
also
the
less
world
likely to
as
receive
finishing
financial
schools
aid,
for the children of
while
wealthy and
84%
well-connected,
of students at
rather than
non-Ivy
knowledge centers
colleges
that can freely
enjoy a
evaluate
discount off the sticker
and challenge
price.
social
The
and
share of
political
Ivy League
trends.
students receiving
This attack on
institutional
Ivy League
financial
schools
aid
has
is just
worrisome parallels to
52%.
the actions of an authoritarian regime.
In a traditional
and
cartel,
regardless of our views on
restricted
elite
supply
higher
and higher
education, it should
prices
be of
enable
concern
monopoly-like
because it's
profits.
a sharp departure
While
from
nonprofit
the
universities
law
don't
and
earn
from
profits in
our
the
norms and
traditional
democratic
sense,
values.
they still enjoy
A strong
surplus
higher
revenues.
education system is
Ivy League
critical to the country's
universities spend an
economic
average of
strength, to the strength of our
$126,000
democracy,
per full-time
and to
equivalent
creating more
student,
broadly shared
compared to just
prosperity. We need to be
$35,000 for the
working
average
together to
private
ensure
college.
that we're building a system that
These
meets
high levels
all
of
of our
spending
community's
fuel a
needs.
vast administrative
Thank you, and I look
bureaucracy.
forward to your questions.
The average Ivy League
Gentlewoman yields
institution
back.
employs
Chairman.
one non-instructional staffer for
recognized.
every
Have
two
unanimous consent
students,
request?
compared to one staffer
Without
for every
objection.
6 students at other
Mr.
private
Chairman,
colleges.
I ask unanimous
All of this
consent
matters
to
because
enter,
Ivy League institutions
China
have an
really wants
outsized
to attract
impact
the
on the future
talented
of America.
scientists Trump
Ivy
just
League
helped,
graduates are vastly
from today's New York
overrepresented among
Times.
elites
Without
in business,
objection.
politics,
Thank
and
you.
media.
I yield back.
A group of
Thank you,
institutions
Dr.
which
Morgan.
limits
Now proceed
enrollment
under
and
the
charges
5-minute
excessive
rule with
prices
questions,
denies
and the gentleman
opportunity for
from
thousands of
California is
students,
recognized, Mr.
particularly
Eisen.
middle-class students with
Thank you.
strong academic qualifications
Dr. Morgan,
who face an
you went to
unfairly
Boston
low
College,
likelihood of admission
also
today.
known as one of the new
The
Ivies,
surplus
right?
revenues that Ivy League institutions
I did go to
currently
Boston
enjoy
College
fuel
for law
administrative
school. I have
bloat
no idea
that they
whether it's
could
called a new
instead be
Ivy.
used to create more seats
Google
for
says it is.
qualified
and
applicants.
Who else can we ask?
The market for elite education bears many of the telltale
Bottom
signs of
line is
anti-competitive
undergraduate is
behavior.
now over
Whether it meets the legal definition of a
$67,000,
cartel
over
is an open
$88,000 all
question, but it
inclusive.
unambiguously leaves students
Is
in
that one of the
society
elite
worse
schools
off.
that you would be
Thank you for
referring
your
to
attention,
beyond
and I
the
look forward to your
original 8
questions.
Ivy Leagues?
Absolutely. I do think that
Thank you,
colleges
Dr.
like
Cooper.
And let me ask you
We'll
a
now
question.
recognize Mr.
Since
Martin
you made such
for
a
5
point
minutes.
that Boston College, or that other colleges, the basic 8, and we'll just add the new Ivies that
Thank you.
charge similar
Chairman
amounts.
Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin.
They should be
Chair
exempt
Fitzgerald,
from
Ranking Member
antitrust because they
Nadler,
have a small market
distinguished members
share
of
and
the
cater
subcommittee.
to the ultra-rich.
Thank you for extending an invitation
my
to
testimony
testify
offers
today.
no opinion.
No.
on
You
exemptions.
My name is
you
Scott
made
Martin.
a
I'm an
point
attorney
as an
whose work is
antitrust
focused on
point
antitrust litigation
that
for more
they,
than
because
30
they had
years.
such a small market share, they
That
had
includes
little or
more
no
than 2
effect.
decades
I'm
primarily
sorry,
spent on defense
can I
work,
answer the question?
and the
No, I
past
want
10
you to
years
answer that
principally
question.
Okay,
litigating
so
on
the
behalf
point
of plaintiffs.
I'm making about the
I'm also
I
an
don't want
author
to know
and
the point
co-editor
you're
of a
making. You
multi-volume
can say yes
antitrust
or no.
treatise. I care
Did
deeply
you say
about
that?
the benefits
Can you restate
of
the question, please?
competition
What did
and
I
free
say?
markets,
You said,
which is a truly
and I'll
bipartisan
paraphrase,
goal, as well as active
Thank
but
you
fair
very much.
enforcement of our
You said
nation's
that,
antitrust laws.
that, you know, that
As
we
the members
shouldn't
of
be
the subcommittee
concentrating on
know,
them because
the
they had such
antitrust
a
laws
small
address
market
both
share.
unilateral
Is market
conduct and
share
anticompetitive acts
a
undertaken
factor
by a single actor
in
with market
antitrust
power
activity
and concerted conduct,
of multiple
particularly when the latter
companies
involves
working
direct or
together in
horizontal
collusion?
competitors.
I believe we
Most
should be
of my
focusing
remarks
on
will
Now,
be
thank you
directed
for
to
not
the latter.
answering that. You
It's
make
an
it
area of
easy
concern
on me,
regarding
Doctor.
higher education historically.
Mr. Martin,
Principally,
is
the potential
collusion,
for cartel
even
activity,
without
which the
large
United States
market
Supreme
share,
Court
if it
has labeled the
makes
supreme evil
prices
of antitrust.
unreasonably high, if it
In
has an
testifying
effect,
today,
is that
I make
antitrust
no
behavior?
prejudgment It's about per any se current unlawful. conduct.
Okay, so you
Nor
have
does my
per
law
se
firm
unlawful
represent a party in
behavior
the cases I'll discuss.
alleged, and yet
Indeed,
the
the hope of
Democrats' witness,
antitrust
for some
lawyers
strange
is
reason,
always
wants to
that
say,
free
oh,
markets
don't look
are
at that
operating
shiny
properly,
object.
and that unlawful
Instead,
conduct
what we
is
heard
not
today
interfering with
was,
that.
give
There are
us
several
more
reasons
funding
here
for
for
the
heightened
bloated
vigilance to
state
protect and
universities
encourage
that also are
robust
raising their
competition
prices.
in higher education. First,
Mr. Shea,
as members of the
you're,
subcommittee, as well as many American
you
students and parents
described
know,
yourself
the
as
price of higher
sort of part
education,
of the
specifically
wealthy
for
and
private
entitled,
schools, has outpaced
which
the rate
is
of
unusual
inflation.
in this body for anyone.
Since
Everyone
I was
else
in
seems
college,
to want to be
consumer price
Horatio
index has
Albert.
inflated the dollar by a factor of 3, but tuition prices at the most
Your
selective
family was
institutions in
able to
particular
pay what
have
needed to
gone
be
up
paid
on the order
at
of
a
sevenfold.
Ivy League school,
Meanwhile,
correct?
output in
Right.
terms of class
And
size
most
has
Americans
not
can't
kept
afford
pace
this.
with population growth.
$92,000 a year.
This is true
That's like
despite increased demand and
150% of
increasing
the median
multi-billion
American
dollar
income.
endowments.
Okay,
Common
and
sense
the evidence that's being
begs the
presented
question
today
whether
is
such
that
a market
the
is
effect is
working
not just
properly.
Ivy League schools,
Second,
but if you
somewhat
take away
cloistered
the
nature of these
subsidies being
institutions, their
paid by other
nonprofit status,
taxpayers,
not to be confused
all
with their massive
universities are
endowments.
rising at
In a
very
belief
high
of which I am
rates
not
because of these
questioning the
practices,
sincerity,
including
that they are
when you
engaged
talked
in
about
noble
this
work of the
massive
advancement
amount
of knowledge may create an atmosphere
overhead,
suggesting
if
that
you will,
relaxation of rules of
inefficient
competition
overhead by
would be
administrators.
appropriate for this industry.
Absolutely. Administrative
Not so.
overhead is growing
Most legal
not just at
scholars
the
will
Ivy
tell you
League,
not
but at
only
state
that
universities
antitrust
all
exemptions
across the
are
country.
rare
It's risen
and rightly
dramatically in
so,
recent years.
but also that
And Dr.
special
Cooper,
sectoral
is
rules
it
and
fair to
regulation
say
have
that
at
one of
best
the
a
things
mixed
you
track
see
record
among
in our nation.
cartels, antitrust
In a different
activity,
higher education
and so on,
context,
is
my
you
law firm
see
brought the
higher
O'Bannon
prices
case that challenged
and less
NCAA
efficient
restraints on
higher
college
overhead.
athletes.
Isn't that
That
kind of a
marketplace has
hallmark when you
flourished,
give
and the sky
antitrust
has not
exemption?
fallen.
That's correct.
And
We often
third,
see higher
there are
prices
numerous
and higher profits.
markers here
So,
familiar to
for our
antitrust
witnesses,
practitioners
is it
that this
fair
is a
to
market
say
ripe
that
for distortion
if,
by
in fact,
collusion.
we
Among
bring
other things,
back real
this is a somewhat
competition at all
concentrated
levels,
industry
at all
with relatively
universities,
few
and
highly
as a
selective
result,
institutions
we
as
then would
participants.
be able to drive
There are
down
numerous
prices,
opportunities for
drive
those entities
up
to
the
collude, whether
efficiency.
directly,
We could, in
such
fact,
as at meetings
allow
of
more
university
people to be
presidents,
able to leave
or
college
facilitated
without
through
burdensome
intermediaries
debt.
such as the College Board. And there are, of
I think
course,
that's correct.
exceptionally
We
high
need more
barriers
competition
to
in
entry
higher education.
into the market.
Okay, so
As I mentioned, by way of
today's hearing
context,
is
this
really
industry
about
has been the
antitrust
subject of
behavior by the
investigations
most
and
esteemed
litigation,
university.
raising
And
competition
Mr. Shea, I'm
concerns
gonna
in the
ask you a
past on
question.
issues ranging from
Is
no
it
poach
your
agreements concerning
understanding,
graduate
as
school
a
faculty
rising
members,
junior,
to
if I'm correct,
monopolization of markets
that
and
if you
for
go to
college
one of these great
bookstore sales
universities,
and
the
local
rest
housing.
of your life,
common
your
application
career
used by over 1,000
income
colleges
is
and
on
universities
average
throughout the
greater,
United
isn't
States.
it?
Also has
This
been
is
the subject
empirically true,
of a
is that
private
going to an
antitrust
Ivy League
action,
school
ultimately settled.
can definitely
And
raise
perhaps
your
most pertinent,
potential earnings,
the subcommittee
especially
here,
if you're from
In
a low-income
1989, as you've
family.
heard,
So,
the
Mr.
DOJ
Martin,
filed a civil
the
antitrust
tendency
case against
by
a
the
group of
universities
universities
that will deliver
alleged to
the
have employed
highest
the same analysis
lifetime
to
earnings
compute
to
family
restrict,
contributions
to
toward the cost
reduce,
of attendance,
and as a
for
result,
purposes
to
of
deny
collectively
to
determining
the people who
financial
otherwise
assistance
would have that
offered to commonly
opportunity.
admitted
Isn't that
students.
one of the
That
real
case resulted
detriments
in
of
a
this
10-year
antitrust
consent
behavior?
decree in 1991, It should trouble under us which as those antitrust universities lawyers.
Thank you. I
committed
yield
not
back.
to agree
Gentleman
on
yields
student
back. Now
financial aid.
recognize the
And
ranking member for
subsequently
5
to
minutes.
congressional passage of the so-called 568
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
exemption.
Dr. Morgan Before I
permitting
begin my
colleges to
questions,
formulate common
can you
approaches
please
to
say
awarding
your
financial
answer
aid,
to Mr.
provided
Ice's
they
question on
strictly
market
adhere
size?
to need-blind
Yes,
admissions.
I believe that market size is
568
relevant here to
exemption
the question
expired
of
on
where
September
we should be
30,
focusing our
2022,
attention.
and was
the
not
vast
renewed.
majority of students
However,
in America
as you know,
do
current
not
and former
attend
college
Ivy League
students
colleges,
allege
and
in a
they
class
don't
action
attend
filed in
colleges
2022
whose,
that members
who
of the
are affected by the
568 President's
competitive
Group
forces
of
that
17
the
top
committee is
private
discussing
colleges
here
and
today.
universities
We need
have
to be
conspired
focused
to
on
eliminate
open
competition
access
among them
colleges
or
and
financial
community
aid.
colleges
To date,
who take
12
their
of those
cues from
17
the
schools
state
have resolved the
legislators and federal
lawsuit in
legislators
settlements
who provide
totaling
sufficient
approximately
resources for their budgets.
$320 million.
Thank you.
I
For
thank you
many,
again
college is a
for your
good investment that
attention and your
ensures greater
vigilance
earnings over a
in this
lifetime and
regard.
an opening to the middle class.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr.
However, the cost
Shea,
of tuition at
you may
many
begin.
schools is too high,
Chairman
closing the door
Fitzgerald,
for families who
Ranking
cannot
Member
afford
Nadler,
the high
Chairman
sticker
Jordan,
price.
Ranking
Despite
Member
this affordability
Raskin,
problem and the
thank you
growing
for inviting me
disparity
to
between the
appear
richest
before you
few
today.
and the many
My
who are
name is
seeing
Alex
rising
Shea,
prices
and I'm
in
a
all
rising
parts of the
junior at
market,
Brown University,
the Republicans'
one of the most
reconciliation bill
exclusive
takes direct aim
institutions
at
in the
student loan
world.
programs
But I'm not
and
here to
other
glorify
critical
the Ivy
student
League.
aid programs.
I'm here to warn you.
The Trump
the promise
administration
of
has also
American higher
taken aim at
education,
students and universities
of opportunity
while pulling
through
critical research
meritocracy
funding
is under
and
attack.
kidnapping students
I'm
and
a legacy
academics
student
off
at
the
Brown.
street.
I went to a prep
Dr.
school
Morgan,
that feeds to
how
the
does the
Ivy League.
Republican
My
budget
parents are
impact low-income
doctors who can
students
afford
and the public's
the
access to higher
$93,000 a
education
year
going
sticker
forward?
price? In
The
other words,
Republican
I'm
budget is
exactly
going to
who
have
the Ivy League
drastic
was built
negative
for.
impacts
But what
on
about the kids who weren't
cost
born
of
on
higher
third base?
education for most
Statistically
students
speaking,
in this country.
for a smart kid from a
As I
poor
said in my
family,
testimony,
an Ivy League
it's gonna
degree can
cut
power
Pell
their
Grants
ascent to the
for
upper income
millions
bracket
of
better than
students,
anything else.
making them
That's the
foot
American
the bill for
dream.
more of college.
But today,
it's going to
that
make
dream is
student
now a
loans
luxury
more
good.
expensive to repay on the back end.
According to the New York
It
Times,
caps
at Brown,
the
the median
amount of
student
federal
family
student
makes
loans
over
that people can take on, but
$200,000 a year.
not the amount
Half
of
the student
tuition,
body
meaning
comes from the
that
top
more people
5%
are
of
going to have
earners.
to take on
And research by
private student
Brown's
loans
own professor,
to
John
cover that
Friedman,
gap.
shows that even equally qualified
And how does
low-income
higher
students are
education
vastly
support the country and our
underrepresented.
economy generally?
At this
Higher
very
education
moment,
is
the American
incredibly
people are
important for our
tightening their
economy,
belts.
and it serves a
And
number
Brown
of purposes.
is raising tuition
Number one,
to
those
beyond
open access schools
$90,000
and
a year.
community colleges that I
And even
referred
while
to
charging
are
students the
educating
price of a
people
luxury
to
car,
become doctors,
Brown is on
to
track to
become
run a $46
nurses,
million
nurse
deficit this year.
practitioners,
Where's all
HVAC
the money
repair
going?
people, electricians.
I'll tell you where it's going.
The
It's
people
going
who
into
serve our
an empire
communities
of
every day
administrative
and make our
bloat
economy
and bureaucracy.
robust. But our
Brown employs
educational institutions
3,805
also
full-time
provide
non-instructional
funding
staff for just
receive funding to do
7,229
research
undergrads.
that
That's
provides
one administrator for every
innovations
2
that are
students.
incredibly important to
This
our
isn't
society.
education.
They make us safer,
This is
they
bloat,
make us healthier,
paid for on
and
the
they make
backs
our
of
country
students
more
and families
competitive.
who are mortgaging
Well,
their futures
following
for
up
a
on
shot
that, how
at a
does the
better life.
gutting of federal
Meanwhile, Grace
research programs
Calhoun,
at the National
Brown's athletic
Institutes of
director,
Health,
earns over
the
$1
Centers
million.
for Disease Control
A
and
household
Prevention,
assistant
and
on
the National
payroll
Science
tends to
Foundation
University
impact
President
not just
Christina
the
Paxson.
institutions,
And when
but society
budget cuts are
and even
made,
humanity.
these expenses
I
stay
think we're all
while the
going to
student
feel the
experience
impacts of these
deteriorates.
cuts for a long
My dorm
time.
floods
We're
when
not
it
going to be
rains,
developing
and the burger
the
patties in our
drugs
dining
that
hall
make
have been
us
replaced by
safer
an
and healthier in
unappetizing
this
beef
country.
mushroom blend.
We're not going to be
The idea that
developing
Brown's
the
administration
innovations
can be
to help
streamlined
keep us
isn't conjecture.
competitive and power
We didn't used to have
manufacturing
these many
within our
administrators.
country.
Across
So
the
it's going to
nation,
have a
the
really big
number of
impact
university
on us
administrators
as a
has risen
whole.
by
I also think
162%
that it's
in
going to
recent
move
decades.
more
And it's no
innovation
coincidence
to
that
the private
correspondingly,
sector, which
the
means
cost
that
of
we're
education
really
has risen
only going to be developing
181%
the
in
innovations that are
inflation-adjusted dollars
profitable
since the 90s.
and not necessarily the ones
Across
that
the
are
pond,
best for
a
the public
world-class
as a whole.
education
And
at
most of
Oxford
our
or Cambridge
drugs
can cost
are not
about half as
initially
much as an Ivy League
profitable
degree,
without federal
in part due to a much lower
research.
administrative burden.
Dr.
The
Morgan,
status quo has a real human cost.
the United States
I
has
recently
been the
learned of a
beneficiary
brilliant young
of
man
foreign
from Pensacola,
students coming
Florida,
here,
who got into Brown,
being
but was forced
educated
to walk
here,
away because the
best and
financial
the
aid wasn't
brightest,
enough.
and staying
Brown
here
says it meets 100%
is
of
one of the
demonstrated
reasons
need.
for our
But Brown gets to
scientific
decide
supremacy.
what that need is.
What is the
Middle-class
effect of
students
the
in
Trump
particular
administration's
suffer from these
hostility to
policies,
foreign
earning
students
too much to
and
qualify for
denials of
generous
visas
scholarships,
and even
but not enough to go to
revocations
Brown
of
without
visas?
straddling
What
themselves
will be
with
the effect
significant
on
amounts of
our
debt. And
economy
let's not
and
forget
on our
that Brown
Brown is one of
scientific
several Ivy League
supremacy?
schools that settled a
Yes,
federal
I think
antitrust
that,
lawsuit
first of all,
last
we
year
have
for
to view
allegedly
this
colluding
attack
to
on
suppress
foreign
financial aid
students
offers.
at American
I'm a
colleges
reporter for
as
the Brown
part of a
Spectator,
larger
and to
punitive
document this
effort
problem,
to
I
bend
created a
certain
website called
colleges to
Bloat
the
at Brown
administration's will. So this is
that
really
used
part of an
AI
effort
to assess whether each
to kind of
administrative
turn
role
the
was
screws
actually
in
necessary.
any place
I
that the
sent each
administration
administrative
can
employee a
to bring
Doge-style
colleges
email
around
to
to
ask
a
them,
set of
But what would be
do
the
all day?
result?
Oh, sure.
Instead of answering, Brown's
I
response
think
was
the result of
retaliation.
these,
My social security number was leaked.
this change to,
Our website was hacked.
to admission
And
for
Associate
international
Dean
students
Kirsten Wolf
is going to
launched a
have an effect
disciplinary
on our
investigation
country's
into a litany
ability
of baseless
to
charges,
bring
such as
in minds
emotional
from all
harm.
across the
Well, they
world
couldn't
and
get me.
benefit from
They charged
their
every single
academic
board member of the
excellence,
Brown
to
Spectator
provide,
an unprecedented attack on
an
student
opportunity
journalism.
for those
But we
students
refused
to
to
take
back
part
down,
in our
and we
democracy
won
and
our
learn our
hearings.
values.
In short, it
There was no
promises to
misconduct,
shift
only exposure.
scientific
And that's what
primacy
Brown
from
feared
the
the
United
most.
States to China.
This
Would you
committee
agree
has a
with that?
responsibility,
I totally agree with
not
that.
just to
Thank you. I
investigate
yield back.
Ivy League antitrust
Gentleman
violations,
yields
but
back.
to
Now
reclaim reclaim the
recognize the
American
gentleman from
dream
Washington
from those
for
who have
5
twisted
minutes.
it into a racket.
Well,
I call on you today
thank you,
to subpoena
Mr. Chair,
Brown's president,
for holding
Christina
this
Paxson,
important
and ask
hearing.
her
There
why
is
Brown
zero
costs
doubt that
$92,000 a
the
year.
Ivy League
The
institutions
American dream
behave
isn't just for the
in
legacies,
a,
the coastal elites,
anti-competitive
or the children
manner.
of privilege.
In
It
fact,
belongs to
if
the
you
kid
look
in
at their
rural
pricing
Kansas
and
with a
value and
4.0
marketing
GPA,
model, it
the
looks
first
very
gen student
similar
working in night
to
shift,
some
the
famous
families who
jewel
did everything
companies
right
and how
and
they
still got
control
priced out.
the supply
They
of
deserve a seat
diamonds
at
and
the
inflate
table.
what is a
They
commodity
deserve a shot at making
into
it
a
big.
precious
Their
item
American
of
dreams
limited
matter
scarcity.
too. I thank you for the
But I do
opportunity to
believe
testify,
that
and I
American
welcome
higher
your
education
questions.
is a gem
Thank
of
you, Mr.
American
Shea.
society.
Dr. Morgan, you may begin.
What it does
Good morning,
for
Chairman Fitzgerald,
research,
Ranking Member
social
Nadler, and
mobility,
members of the
and
subcommittee.
overall aid
Thank
to our
you for the
economy
opportunity to testify
is
at this
extremely
hearing.
important.
The
Unfortunately,
rising
it's a
cost of
gem that
college
has been
beyond high school
thrust
in this
into the
country
mud
is a major concern
largely
for many
by
American
Democratic
families.
leadership.
Whether they're looking at an
And
associate's
Democrats are
degree in
great
nursing,
if you're a
a
college
vocational
administrator
certificate to become an
and want to see
HVAC
your salary
technician, or a
increase,
four-year
your
degree in
job supply
business,
increase. They're
Americans looking to
terrible
get ahead
if you're a
in the job
college
market are
student
facing
and
high
you
tuition
don't
bills.
want to see your
And
debt
most families
levels
are forced to cope by
increase.
taking on student
The
loan
right
debt that
price
becomes a
for
lifelong
college
burden.
should be
I
the
applaud
price at
committee's
which a
interest in
student
the
can get
cost of
through
higher
with zero
education.
debt.
However, the focus of this
College should be
inquiry is
priced at the
misplaced.
level you can work a
Ivy League
part-time
institutions
job
train less
or a
than
summer job.
0.4% of
And
undergraduate students
you know,
in
the
this
problem with an
country,
18-year-old is
whereas
they don't know the
the
difference
vast
between
majority of students attend
$6,000 in
public
debt
community
or
colleges and
$60,000 in
open-access
debt.
state
They've never had a
colleges.
job and
Ivy
had to
League
pay it
admissions
back.
and
So what
tuition
this body
practices
should be
have
doing
no
is
effect
how do we
on the
create
schools
an
that most
environment where
Americans
all
attend.
students can get
Looking
through
for a
school
solution to college
with no
costs
debt.
in the Ivy League
When I was in
is
our
like looking
state
for a
Senate,
needle in a haystack
as
while the rest
Republicans,
of
when
the
we took
haystack is
control of
on
the state
fire.
Senate, we actually
And here's
dropped
the
the
latest
price
source
of
of that
college
fire.
tuition
Legislation
20%
approved
in
by the
Washington
House of
State under
Representatives
Republican
pays for
leadership
tax
because
cuts
we were
for the
working
richest
for the
Americans
middle
by
class.
increasing the price of
I've had the
college
experience
for
of
low
going to a
and
big state
middle-income
school,
students,
Washington State
including
University,
taking
where my
away Pell
father's
Grants from
professor.
1.4
I spent a
million
year
Americans
as a
and
teacher at
reducing them for
Catholic
another
University of
3 million.
Mozambique,
The
teaching
deep
war
cuts to
refugees.
Medicaid
I was a
and SNAP
teaching
in that
fellow
bill
at
will
Harvard
also
when I did my
likely
master's
increase
there,
public school
and I
tuition
was
by
on
squeezing
short-term on the
state
faculty at
budgets,
Science
as
Po
higher
University
education
in
will be at the
Paris, which
top
is
of the
kind of the
chopping
Harvard
block to
of
cover
France.
state
And
budget
across
shortfalls.
all those
Antitrust at elite colleges is deeply
experiences,
inadequate for
what I
solving the
saw
problem
is
of high
that
prices of college in America.
the amount of
Attempting to
growth
leverage
in
antitrust
administrators
as a global
in
fix to
American
college pricing
universities
and
is simply
admissions
out
while
of control.
simultaneously slashing
When you go to
federal
Science
support for
Po,
higher
there's no
education
diversity
could
deans,
very
student
well
housing
result in
deans,
less
student welfare
access to
deans.
college
There
for
is
lower and
simply
middle-income
this
families,
reliance
not
on
more.
college students to
Congress
behave
has
as
powerful
adults
tools at hand
and figure
that
stuff
could
out for
really change
themselves.
the
In
price
doing
of
that, they're able to
college and
provide
improve the
college
value of
at a
the
much,
government's
much
investment
lower
that are outside
level.
of this
So what this body
committee's
needs to do
jurisdiction. For
is to
example,
figure
the
out
federal
ways to
government
get out
could
all
use
the
its
BS
muscular
out of higher
role in
education, get back to
finance
basics,
to the
and
advantage of millions
create
of American
mechanisms
families by
to bring
negotiating the price of
costs
college
down.
tuition.
Now, I do want to
There's
touch on this
strong
issue of the
bipartisan
Ivy
precedent
Leagues
for
and
this in
Harvard
Medicare,
specifically, which
where the
does
federal
have some
government
real
assigns
problems.
payment rates to
When I
healthcare
went to
services
Harvard, there was a
provided
lack
to
of
Medicare
viewpoint diversity. We
beneficiaries.
used to call the
And while Ivy
Republican
League
club the phone
practices
booth
don't
club
trickle
because there were
down
so
to
few of us
open
we could
access
fit in a phone
schools,
booth. Now I
the
make that
predatory
joke,
practices
and
of
a lot of students
for-profit
don't even know what a phone
colleges
booth
are
is.
definitely
But
trickling up.
in any event, the
Community
solution to
colleges must
this
contend
is
with
just to
for-profit
make
schools
these
that siphon off
universities
students through aggressive
reflective of
marketing
American
and then leave
society.
them with
It's
high
like
debt
Noah's
and low
Ark.
earnings potential.
Just increase
As
access
Congress
and
looks to
viewpoint
roll back
diversity.
regulation of for-profit
This shouldn't be
colleges,
hard,
these conditions will
except
only
the fact the
worsen.
far left does not want to give up its stranglehold
Today's focus
on
Ivy League
America's
colleges
most elite
comes after a
universities.
string
But
of
this is going to
actions by
happen.
government leaders
Secondly, there is a problem with the Chinese government and foreign institutions utilizing America's most elite universities. When I went to Harvard, there was sort of a small-scale scandal that they refused to fly the flag of Taiwan at that time. And in fact, we have some important legislation here in this body in the Deterrent Act, which we passed out of the House that would illuminate how much foreign influence is going on in college campuses from places like China. And even today, Harvard resists implementing that bill. I'd like to enter for the record this column, this newspaper article that Harvard has trained so many Chinese communist officials, they call it their party school. So there very much is a problem of China, these universities. If I could enter for this in the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And finally, I just want to thank all the panelists for fighting this antitrust issue. But as we think about these issues, we all need to realize that college enrollment is about to go off a cliff due to demographic changes in America. We have a silver tsunami of older Americans, and we have a dwindling rapidly supply of college students. because
Chairman,
of demographic
yes,
factors in
unanimous
terms of birth
consent
rates and
to,
also the
enter,
cost. So this
China really
anti-competitive
wants to attract
behavior
the
will likely
talented
become
scientists
worse
Trump
in
just
coming
helped,
years
from
as
today's
the
New York
market,
Times.
total market for
Without
college
objection.
students
Thank you. I yield back.
reduces. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan.
Gentleman
Now
yields
proceed
back.
under the 5-minute rule with questions.
Mr. Nadler is
The gentleman
recognized
from
for
California
unanimous
is
consent
recognized,
request.
Mr. Eisel.
Mr. Chairman, I
Thank
ask
you,
unanimous consent to enter into
Dr.
the record
Morgan,
an article from
you went to
New
Boston
America
College,
titled
also
House
known as one of the
Reconciliation
new
Bill Makes
Ivies,
College
right?
Less Affordable, all to pay
I
for
did go to
tax cuts
Boston
for
College
millionaires
for
and
law
billionaires.
school. I have no
It
idea
argues
whether it's called
low-income
the
to
new
moderate
Ivies.
students will, quote,
Google
borrow
says
more
it
but
is,
with
and
worse terms.
who else can we
Without
ask?
objection.
Thank you, and I also
the,
seek unanimous consent to enter into
bottom
the
line
record
is
two articles,
undergraduate is
one
now
entitled
over
"The number of 18-year-olds is about
$67,000,
to
over
drop sharply," as
$88,000
the
all
gentleman said.
inclusive.
Without objection.
And
Is
another
that one of the
entitled
elite schools that
"Declining
you would be
enrollment is leading
referring to
to
beyond the
school
original
closures."
8
Without
Ivy
objection.
Leagues?
The
Absolutely. I do think that college.
ranking member of the
And
full
let me
committee,
ask
Mr.
you a
Raskin, is
question.
now recognized for 5 minutes.
Since you
Thank you, Mr.
made
Chairman.
such a point that Boston
Mr.
College,
Shade, so
or that
you
other
describe
colleges,
yourself
the
as
basic 8, and we'll
a
just
son
add the
of
new Ivies that
wealth and
charge
privilege.
similar
I think
amounts.
you describe yourself as a legacy student.
They
Does that
should
mean
be
your parents or your
exempt from
grandparents went
antitrust
to
because they
Brown?
have a
Yeah, my
small
father
market
went to
share and
Brown.
cater to the ultra rich.
But other than having some complaints
testimony
like the
offers
beef
no
mushroom
opinion.
No,
blend,
you
you're
made a
really
point
speaking
as
not
an
so much for yourself,
antitrust
but
point
for other
that
kids. You said the
because
kids
they
who are
had
not
such a
born
small
on third
market
base.
share, they
Is that
had
right?
little or no
Absolutely.
effect.
I think the value
sorry,
of an Ivy League degree
can
used
I
to mean that
answer the
you
question?
were
No,
smart,
I
that
want
you're
you to
brilliant,
answer
but I
that
think it's being
question.
Okay, so
diminished.
the
And as you
point
know, the
I'm
vast
making about
majority
the-
I don't want to know
young
the
people
point
who
you're
want to go
making.
to college
You
are
can
not
say
going to
yes
be
or
able to go
no.
to Brown, even if you
Did you
increase
say that?
the class
Can you
sizes
restate
you've
the question,
advocated
please?
by
What did I
a
say?
couple hundred
You
kids.
said,
The vast majority
and I'll
are
paraphrase,
going to end up going to, if
Thank
they
you
can
very
afford
much.
it, state
You said
universities,
that
community
that we
colleges,
shouldn't be
and so on.
concentrating
Now,
on
my
them because
question
it
to
had
you
such
is,
a
will you
small
use your
market share.
platform
Is
here
market
today
share
to oppose
a
the
factor
major cuts
in
in Pell
antitrust
Grants, which have
activity
allowed an
of
avenue
multiple
for upward
companies
mobility and
working
education to young
together
people
in
that are built
collusion?
I
into the
believe we should be
current tax
focusing on
bill?
Now, thank you for not answering that. You make it easy on me,
And I just
Doctor.
wonder if you would oppose the cuts
Mr.
to Pell
Martin,
Grants, the cuts to
is
student loans,
collusion,
and the cuts,
even
the
without
80%
large
cuts
market
to
share,
college work
if it,
study,
if
which
it
you know
makes
allows people
prices
to work their way through
unreasonably
college.
high,
Well, I
if
think
it has an
something that
effect,
we've
is that
observed
antitrust
economically is
behavior?
that
I'm going
It's
to,
per se
like my
unlawful.
friend, I'm going to ask you to
Okay,
answer
so you
the
have
question.
per se
Do you
unlawful
oppose all those
behavior
cuts, or do you support them?
alleged, and yet
I
the
guess I
Democrats
believe
witness
that,
for some
that
strange
subsidizing
reason wants
education
to
only
say,
increases the
oh,
cost
don't look at
because
that
it-
shiny
you favor
object.
those cuts. So you would
Instead,
just get rid of the
what we
Pell
heard
Grant
today
program. Is that right?
was,
I'm not
give
an
us
expert on
more
the Pell Grant
funding
program, but
for
I
the
know that
bloated
generally-
You seem to be an
state
expert.
universities
So
that also are raising their prices.
You don't favor federal student aid
Mr. Shea,
to kids who
you're,
want to go to college.
You
for Pell Grants or
described
college
yourself
work study.
as
You're
sort of part
opposed
of
to that?
the wealthy
I think that when
and
students
entitled,
don't pay the cost of going to
which
college,
is
then
unusual in
we've
this
seen
body
prices
for
rise.
anyone. Everyone else
You made
seems to
yourself clear,
want
and
to
thank
be
you for coming in
Horatio
for your
Albert.
testimony. Look, a point was made before that
your family
collusion
was
is
able
per
to
se
pay what
illegal,
needed to be paid
which of course is
at
true as a matter
Ivy
of
League school,
antitrust
correct?
law.
Right,
But
and
per
most
se
Americans can't
collusion
afford
is
this,
only
though.
illegal if there
$92,000
is
a year,
actually
that's like
per se collusion.
150% of
Now,
the
this
median
reminds me
American
of a
income.
hearing that we did over the
and
Oversight
the
Committee
evidence that's being
with Chairman
presented
Comer about
today
impeachment,
is that
where
the effect
the
is not just
Republicans
Ivy
lined up
League
all these
schools,
witnesses
but if you
about
take away
impeachment
the
of Joe
subsidies
Biden,
being
and then
paid by
all of them
other
said that they didn't
taxpayers,
see
all
evidence,
universities
they
are
were
rising
not
at
aware of
very
evidence that
high
would justify
rates because of
impeachment.
these
And so the
practices,
two expert
including
witnesses
what
here,
you talked
Dr.
about,
Cooper
this
and Mr.
massive
Martin, as I'm
amount
reading your
of,
testimony, are saying that
overhead,
they
if you will,
don't have
inefficient
evidence
overhead
of
by
price fixing.
Absolutely,
Mr. Martin
administrative
says,
overhead
I think
is
you
growing
just
not
stated
just at
it,
the
I
Ivy
make
League,
no
but at state
judgment about
universities
any current
all across the
conduct.
country.
You're not
It's
making a
risen
statement. And
dramatically in
Dr.
recent
Cooper,
years.
you
Dr.
said my
Cooper,
testimony does
is it
not
fair
take
to
a
say
position
that one of the
on
things
whether
you
Ivy
see
Leagues are
among
coordinating their pricing
cartels,
decisions or whether
antitrust
they're in
activity,
violation of federal
and so
antitrust
on,
law. So
is you
again,
see
this is
higher
much ado about
prices
nothing.
And
This
less
is an attempt
efficient,
just to
higher
create kind of a
overhead. Isn't that kind of
propaganda
a
smokescreen
hallmark when you
to
give
attack the Ivy League
antitrust
schools?
exemption?
And your
That's
expert
correct. We often
witnesses
see higher
are saying
prices
that they
and
don't
higher
have
profits.
evidence that there are
So,
antitrust
for our
violations
witnesses,
going
is
on.
it fair
And
to
of course,
say
they're correct,
that
because if there
if,
were,
in fact,
the
we
Trump
bring back
Department of
real
Justice would actually be
competition at
engaged
all levels,
in
at all
prosecution
universities,
or an investigation
and
of them.
as a result,
so we have
we
one
then would be able to
champion of
drive
the working
down
class
prices,
at Brown University
drive
who
up
is
the
opposed to Pell
efficiency.
Grants
We could,
and
in
other
fact,
means
allow
for
more
kids to
people to
actually
be
go
able
to
to leave
college
college
in America, where
without
most kids do
burdensome
go to
debt.
college, and two expert witnesses who don't see
I think
price
that's
fixing
correct.
taking
We
place
need more
by the
competition
Ivy
in
League
higher
institutions.
education.
But there is a real problem
Okay,
in
so
America. Only
today's
10%
hearing
of
is
college
really about
students
antitrust behavior
go
by
to
the
for-profit
most
colleges, but they're
esteemed
responsible
university.
for
Mr. Shea, I'm going to ask you a
50% of
question.
all student loan
Is it your
defaults. And I'm going to ask
understanding,
for
as a rising junior,
unanimous
if I'm
consent to
correct,
enter
that
a
if
campaign
you go to
statement
one of these
by
great
Marco
universities,
Rubio,
the rest of
entitled
your
Trump
life,
University
your
is an
career
absolute scam.
income
Get
is
the
on
facts about
average
pending
greater,
litigation.
isn't it?
This
we
is
could, Mr.
empirically
Chairman.
true, is that
But
going to
Dr.
an Ivy
Morgan,
League
let me-
school
well,
can
let me go to you.
definitely raise your
How does the
potential earnings,
Republican
especially
attack
if you're
on
from
regulatory
a low-income family.
protections against
Mr. Martin,
for-profit
the
colleges and
tendency
universities
by the universities that will deliver the highest
affect
lifetime earning
the
to
fraud
restrict,
against
to
students taking
reduce,
place in
and
the
as a
education
result, to
market generally,
deny
because they are
to the people who
dismantling
otherwise
the
would have that
regulations that were put in
opportunity.
place
Isn't
to
that one of
protect
the
students
real
against
detriments of this
for-profit
antitrust
university
behavior?
fraud.
Yeah, we're seeing
it should
action
trouble
both
us as
here in
antitrust
Congress
lawyers.
and at the
Thank you. I
Department
yield
of
back.
Education
Gentleman
that are
yields back.
dismantling
Now
or laying the groundwork to
recognize the ranking
dismantle
member
all of
for
the
5
protections
minutes.
that have been put in place for for-profit schools. And what
Thank
we've
you, Mr.
seen
Chairman.
cyclically
Dr.
over
Morgan,
time is when
before I
those
begin my
rules are
questions,
pulled back,
can
we
you,
have
please
increased
say
enrollment
your
in for-profit
answer to Mr.
colleges.
Ice's
We have
question on market
increased debt
size?
that people can't pay
Yes,
off, and
I
we have
believe that
increased
market size
allegations
is
of
relevant
fraud.
here.
Okay,
It's
and
the
what about their
question
move
of
to
where we
abolish the
should be
Department of
focusing our
Education and to
attention.
gut the
vast
Consumer
majority of students
Financial
in America do
Protection
not
Bureau?
attend
Will that
Ivy League
exacerbate the
colleges,
difficulties
and they
that young
don't
people are
attend
having
colleges
paying for college?
We're
taking
who are affected
cops
by the
off the beat,
competitive
who can
forces
actually
that
identify
the
that
committee is
fraud
discussing here
and
today.
stop it and
We
put
need
money
to be
back into
focused
people's
on
pockets.
Gentleman's
open
time.
access colleges
Gentleman's
and
time has
community
expired.
colleges who take
I
their
ask unanimous
cues from the
consent to enter
state
the record the
legislators
following
and federal
article from
legislators who
Ivy Coach
provide
titled
sufficient resources
Ivy
for
League
their
Tuition and
budgets.
Fees for 2024-25.
Thank you. For many, college is a good
comparing tuition rates
investment that
amongst
ensures greater
the
earnings
8
over a
Ivy
lifetime
League
and an
schools,
opening
and
to the
also
middle
an
class.
article from
However,
Ivy
the
Coach
cost of
titled
tuition
Ivy
in
League
many
Admission
schools is too
Statistics,
high,
comparing the
closing the door to
acceptance
families
rates
who cannot
amongst
afford the
the 8
higher,
Ivy
the high
League
sticker
schools.
price.
I now recognize the
Despite this
gentleman from
affordability
Virginia.
problem and the growing disparity
Mr.
between
Chairman.
the
I
richest
appreciate
few
the
and the many who
hearing,
are
and I
seeing
appreciate
rising
comments of the
prices in all
ranking
parts
member.
of the
Let's
market,
define what
the
collusion
Republicans'
is. Let's actually
reconciliation
look
bill
at
takes
Cornell Law
direct aim at
School's
student loan
definition
programs
and Ivy
and
League
other critical
definition
student aid
of
programs.
collusion in antitrust law.
The Trump
Horizontal
administration has
collusion
also taken
exists
aim at
where
students and
competitors at the same
universities
market
while
level
pulling
agree to
critical
fix or
research
control the
funding
prices they
and
will charge
kidnapping
for their
students
respective
and
goods or
academics
services.
off the
For
street.
instance, two parties
Dr.
may
Morgan,
collude by
how does the
limiting or
Republican
restricting
budget impact
supply,
low-income
sharing
students
insider
and the
information,
public's
or
access to
dividing the
higher
market.
education going
It's
forward?
very clear that the
The
8 Ivy
Republican
League
budget
member
is going to
institutions have a
have
long
drastic
history of
negative
colluding with each other
impacts on
and other
the
elite
cost of
higher
higher
education
education for
institutions.
most students
Back in
in this
1958, they
country.
formed a
As I said
cartel
in my
called the
testimony,
Ivy
it's gonna
Overlap Group
cut
that created a
Pell
common
Grants for
formula
millions
for
of
calculating
students,
financial aid
making
packages to
them
ensure
foot
that a
the bill
student
for more
admitted to one or
college.
more of the
It's going
Overlap
to
Group
make
institutions
student
would pay the
loans
same
more
maximum
expensive
price to
repay
attend,
on the
regardless
back
of the
end.
institution that they
caps
chose. The Overlap Group
amount
would
of
accomplish
federal
this by
student loans
sharing
that people can
information
take
and
on, but
determining the
not
maximum
the
price that
amount of
admitted
tuition,
students'
meaning that
families
more
could
people are
afford
going
to
to
pay.
have to take on
Later,
private
operating
student
under
loans
a now
to
expired
cover that
antitrust
gap.
exemption, many of the Ivy League
And how does
institutions
higher
and other
education
elite
support
higher
the country
education
and our economy
institutions
generally?
formed the
Higher education
568
is
President's
incredibly
Working
important to our
Group,
economy, and
which
it serves a
likewise
number of
created a
purposes.
common formula
Number one,
to
those
ensure
open access
568
schools and community
PWG
colleges that I
schools
referred
would
to
not compete
are
on price.
educating people to become
So
to become
behavior
nurses,
led to lawsuits
nurse
and settlements against
practitioners,
many of the
HVAC
Ivy League
repair
institutions.
people, electricians,
Dr.
you know,
Cooper,
the people
does this
who serve
cartel
our
of elite
communities
higher
every day
education
and make
institutions
our
have the
economy
ability to
robust.
raise the cost
But
for
our
students and their
educational
families who are attempting to pay for
institutions
college?
also provide funding for
Absolutely,
or
Congressman. I
receive
believe the
funding to
opaque
do
financial aid
research
system
that
enables
provides
Ivy League colleges to
innovations
charge
that are
much higher
incredibly
prices
important
than
to
they
our
would be able
society. They
to
make us
in a
safer,
competitive
they
market.
make us
There is a
healthier,
billion-dollar
and they make our
consulting
country
industry
more
that
competitive.
helps Ivy League institutions
following
figure
up on
out
that,
exactly
how
how
does
much
gutting
each family is
federal
able to pay
research programs
and then
at the
charge that
National
amount.
Institutes of Health,
We've seen
the Centers
collusion
for
on pricing
Disease
before
Control and
enactment
Prevention,
of the Section
and the National
568
Science
exemption,
Foundation
and while
impact
the
not just
exemption
the
was in effect,
institutions,
now
but
we are concerned
society
it
and
persists
even humanity.
today, even though the
I think
exemption
we're
has
all going to
expired.
feel the impacts
What
of these
gaps
cuts
in
for a
enforcement
long
have
time.
allowed
We're
Ivy
not going
League
to be
institutions to
developing the
effectively
drugs
operate as a
that
pricing
make
cartel?
us safer and healthier in this country.
So
We're not going
the
to be
prices that
developing
colleges
the
charge are
innovations
very
that help
opaque
keep
right
us
now. You have to
competitive
apply
power
and be admitted in order to
manufacturing
figure
within our
out how much you're
country.
going to pay. And at
So
that
it's going
point,
to have a really
the
big
college
impact
sort of has you
on us as a
attractive,
whole.
that
I also
it's going to be
think
very
that it's
difficult for
going
you
to
to
move more
comparison shop at that
innovation
point,
to
go
the
to a
private
different
sector, which
school, and
means
you
that
kind
we're
of have to
really
accept the
only
price
going
that
to be
the school is
developing the
charging you, or
innovations
else
that are
maybe not go to
profitable
college.
and not necessarily the
So
ones that are best
similar
for,
question to
for the
Mr.
public as
Martin.
a whole.
And most of
These
our drugs
institutions through
are not
the
initially
overlap group and the
profitable
568
without
President's
federal
Working Group used
research.
common financial aid
Dr.
formula
Morgan,
for decades
the United
to make
States
sure
has
they
been
weren't
the
competing on price. Do you
beneficiary
think
of
that
foreign
these
students
institutions
coming
could
here,
still be using that same
being
revenue
educated here,
maximizing formula
best and the
to
brightest,
calculate financial
and
aid
staying
awards
here,
that they used while the exemption was
it's
in
one
place?
of the reasons for
Well,
our
that's the
scientific
subject of an ongoing
supremacy.
litigation in the Northern District
What
of
is the
Illinois,
effect of
and
the
to
Trump
put a finer
administration's
point,
hostility to foreign
I make no
students
prejudgment
and
as to
denials
what
of
the
visas
outcome
and
of that
even
litigation would be.
revocations of visas?
I only know
What would be the
that,
effect
12
on
of the
our
17-member
economy
institutions
and
settled
on
it
our
for a total of
scientific
$320 million.
supremacy?
It survived the
I
motion
think
to
that,
dismiss.
first of all, we
It's
have
gone
to view
on,
this attack on
through,
foreign students at
through
American
discovery.
colleges as
And
part
quite
of a
candidly,
larger
some of the
punitive
documents
effort to
in
bend
that
certain
case
colleges to the
will be
administration's
challenging
will.
for the
So
remaining
this is really
defendants.
part of an effort
And if they are
to
shown
kind
to
of
be
turn
using the same
screws
formula,
in
could
any
that
place
present
that the administration
significant
can
antitrust issues?
to bring colleges around
It
to a
could.
set
There
What
are
would be the
substantial
result?
damages
Oh,
alleged in the
sure.
case.
So I think the result of
Brown's estimated cost of
this
attendance during the
change
25-26
to
academic
admission
year
for
is
international students is going to have an effect on our
$97,284 per
country's
year.
ability to
That means Brown
bring
values a
in
degree
minds
from its
from all
institution at
across
almost
the world and benefit
$400,000.
from their
Do you
academic
think a degree
excellence
from Brown is
to
worth nearly
provide,
$400,000?
an opportunity
That's
for
a
those
very good
students to
question.
take
I think
part
that
in our democracy and learn our
is that
values.
In short, it
empirically, it's
promises
just
to
barely
shift,
worth it. But I think that
scientific
for the
primacy
kids who
from
it
the
can help
United
the
States to
most,
China.
that's
Would you agree
too
with
much
that?
for them to pay
I
up
totally
front.
agree with that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Appreciate that. I would
Gentleman yields
argue
back.
that it
Now
does not,
recognize the gentleman from Washington
the worth
for 5
is
minutes.
not four times the worth
thank you,
of an
Mr.
in-state
Chair,
school
for
or,
holding this
6
important
or 8
hearing.
times
There
that
is
of a
zero doubt
community
that
college
the
education.
Ivy League
And with that, I
institutions
would yield
behave
back.
in
Gentleman
a
yields back.
Mr. Chair, I have
anti-competitive
a
manner.
UC.
In fact, if you look at their pricing and
I ask
value and
unanimous
marketing
consent to enter
model,
into
it
the
looks
record
very similar
ABC News
to
article,
some
Judge
famous
finalizes
jewel
$25 million
companies and how they
settlement for
control
victims of
the
Donald Trump's
supply of
fraudulent
diamonds and
university.
inflate what is a
And
commodity
USA Today, Judge
into a
finalizes
precious
$25
item
million
of
settlement for students
limited
of
scarcity.
sham university.
But I do
Without
believe
objection.
that American higher education is
Gentleman
a
from
gem
California
of
is
American
now
society.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What it
Appreciate
does
you and the
for
ranking member. Thank you
research,
for holding this
social
hearing
mobility,
today.
and overall aid to our economy
I'm sure
is
here in
extremely
Washington,
important.
D.C.,
Unfortunately, it's a
discussing
gem that
Brown,
has been thrust
discussing
into the
Harvard,
mud largely by
discussing
Democratic
private
leadership.
elite universities
And Democrats
is
are
very
great
important.
if you're a college administrator
Somehow,
and
somewhere.
want to see your salary
But not to
increase,
my
your job
district.
supply increase. They're terrible if
blue-collar,
you're a college
middle-class.
student and you
My dad
don't want
wasn't
to
a
see your
doctor.
debt levels
He was
increase.
a union worker
The
making
right
cardboard
price
boxes.
for college
And my mom
should be
used
the
to clean
price
hotel
at which a
rooms at
student can
$1.50
get
an
through
hour.
with zero debt.
And we managed to
College should be
survive.
priced at the level you can work
My
a
neighbors,
part-time job
myself, we were on
or
the
a
same
summer
boat.
job. And
Never thought
the
about
problem with an
Harvard
18-year-old is they
because
don't know the difference between
we weren't gonna have the
$6,000
grades.
in debt or
We weren't gonna have the
$60,000
money,
in debt. They've never
and
had
we
a
had to
job
survive,
and had to pay it
pay
back.
the
So what
rent,
this body should be
the
doing
bills
is how do we create an
on a
environment where
day-to-day basis.
all students can get through school with no
Appreciate
debt.
holding this hearing
When I was
today,
in our state Senate,
talking about
as
these elite
Republicans, when we took control in the state Senate,
but
we
I can
actually
assure
dropped
you
the price
back
of
home,
college tuition
nobody
20%
gives a
in Washington
darn
State
about
under
this
Republican
stuff.
leadership
What they
because we
care
were
about
working
is how to
for the
survive
middle
on a
class.
day-to-day basis.
I've had the experience of going to a big state school,
Public
Washington State
policy.
University, where my father was a
Government
professor. I
subsidization
spent a
of
year
public
as a teacher at
education.
Catholic University of Mozambique, teaching war refugees.
What's that old saying?
I was
If
a
it ain't
teaching fellow
broke,
at Harvard
don't
when I did
fix
my
it.
master's there. And
The
I
GI
was
Bill,
on short-term on the
World War
faculty
II,
at Sciences Po
over.
University
The
in
greatest
Paris, which is kind of the
generation comes
Harvard
back.
of France. And across
back to the
all
US.
those
We decide to pay for the
experiences,
college
what I saw
education.
is that
We educated a
the amount
generation,
of
the
growth
greatest
in
generation
administrators
that built
in
the greatest
American
country in the
universities
world
is simply
on
out
the
of control.
government dime.
When you go to Science
My
Po, there's no
generation.
diversity deans, student housing
I did
deans,
go to
student
Harvard,
welfare
the West
deans.
Coast.
There is simply this
Cal
reliance
State
on
Fullerton.
college students to behave as
Second-rate
adults
school.
and figure stuff out for themselves. And
Not
doing
a
that, they're able to
UC, but a
provide
Cal
college
State.
at a much, much
That was
lower
right for
level.
this
So
kid
what
from the
this
hood.
body needs to do is
By the way,
to figure
my
out ways
tuition
to
then
get out all the
was
BS
zero.
out of higher education, get back to
Pell
basics,
Grant,
and
Cal
create
Grant,
mechanisms
paid for
to
everything,
bring
and I
costs
skipped a
down.
few meals
Now, I do
to
want to
make it
touch on this issue of the Ivy Leagues and Harvard
we are
specifically,
today,
which does have some real
discussing
problems. When I went to Harvard, there was a
Brown.
lack of viewpoint diversity. We used to call the
I have to go back
Republican
and
Club the phone booth
tell
club
my
because there were so few
constituents
of us
that
we could fit in a phone booth.
the
Now I
2
make
or
that
3 hours
joke, and
spent
a
here
lot of students
today
don't even know what a phone
is
booth
gonna
is.
make a
But
big difference
in any
in your
event,
life.
the solution
I
to
will tell
this
you
is
what they're
just to
looking
make
at.
these universities
Pell
reflective
Grants,
of
Pell
American
Grants,
society.
cutting of
It's like
Pell
Noah's
Grants,
Ark. Just
school
increase
loan.
access and viewpoint
They want to
diversity.
know how they
This
can
shouldn't be
also get
hard,
the opportunity to
except
go to
the fact the
college.
far left does
And
not
by
want
the
to give
way,
up its stranglehold
subsidization
on
of
America's most
education.
elite
I
universities.
thought we
But
were all
this is going to
taxpayers.
happen.
Do we not have the
Secondly, there is a
opportunity as
problem with the
taxpayers
Chinese government
to say
and
where
foreign
tax dollars are
institutions
going to go? And
utilizing
those
America's most
taxpayers
elite
go to our
universities.
children.
When I went to
The
Harvard,
greatest gift God
there was sort of a
gives
small-scale
us,
scandal
our
that they
children, to educate
refused
them.
to
So
fly
what's
the
wrong with a
flag of Taiwan
subsidized
at that time.
loan that they
And in
will
fact,
have
we
to
have some
pay back?
important legislation
What
here in this
is
body in the
against
Deterrent
public
Act,
policy here?
which we passed out of the
the
Again,
House that
if
would
it ain't
illuminate
broke,
how
don't
much
fix
foreign
it.
influence
Let's go a little
is going
bit
on
further.
college campuses from
Current
places like
administration,
China. And even today,
public
Harvard
policy,
resists implementing that bill.
research
I'd like
grants,
to enter for the
California,
record this
immigrants.
column, this newspaper article
Chart
that
behind
Harvard
me
has trained so many
shows
Chinese
all of the
communist officials,
AI
they call it their party
companies
school.
have been
So there
recently
very much
started
is a
up
problem of
by
China.
immigrants
These universities,
in this
if I could
country.
enter this in the record.
I
Thank
thought
you,
we were
Mr.
supposed
Chair.
to win.
And finally, I just want to thank all the panelists for fighting this antitrust issue.
the AI competition. And I bring this up in the context of, if it ain't broke, why are we changing education, public policy, investing in research and development, investing in making sure the best and the brightest from around the world come to help us come up with new inventions in this country, keep us ahead of the rest of the world. So again, what is it that's broke that we are trying to fix?
Would the gentleman yield for question?
Go ahead.
Mr. Correa, thank you for your very passionate and eloquent remarks. What would have happened to you if you had not had access to Pell Grants and Cal Grants and public money to go to school? What would happen to your working class constituents today?
Were you asking me to delve into a personal confession? The gift that my father gave me when I graduated from high school was, he said, can't give you a watch, can't give you something nice, but I can free you. You don't have to help us pay rent or pay the bills. You focus on studying, and that's where that financial aid came into being. This kid from the hood who wasn't quite ready for college was able to make it with that financial aid.
Gentleman's time has expired. Now recognize Mr. Gooden from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the points Mr. Shea was trying to make was that these universities shouldn't be so expensive in the first place. None of us want to take away Pell Grants and loan support, et cetera, financial aid for anyone that needs it. Our point is it shouldn't cost this much in the first place, to the point that we need $400,000, whether it's subsidized or not, to pay for these degrees. I'm curious, Mr. Shea, when you started asking all these questions and making noise at Brown University, what was their response to you?
They were not very happy. The Brown administration told people not to respond to our emails, and then they hit us with a disciplinary investigation, charging me personally for bizarre things such as emotional/psychological harm. Apparently that's a real student code of conduct violation, but I was found not responsible for anything. But they also dragged in the entire board of the Brown Spectator and charged all of us. And luckily we were cleared, but I think this shows that there's rot and they're trying to cover it up.
Isn't that interesting that they had a problem with your free speech and the work you were doing, but they didn't have a problem with the pro-Palestinian encampments and all the anti-Semitism? Isn't that just wildly ironic that they would go after little old you, just a student that's banging the drum and kicking and screaming about high cost, and that pissed them off so much that they started an investigation and came after you, but they didn't have a problem with the anti-Semitism all over their campus?
This is certainly a double standard. In 2023, we saw that a large group of protesters were actually arrested for trespassing. They invaded one of the buildings and they were asked to leave. They didn't leave. They were arrested, and Brown told the prosecutor to drop the charges. They weren't disciplined at all. I think there's a clear double standard here.
Well, I hope you'll keep after it. The fact that the Democrats on this committee are going after you, not hard, I'll give them credit, but trying to nail you down on a Pell Grant question that really doesn't have anything to do with the point we're trying to make here. The point is, if college wasn't so expensive, we wouldn't even need all this financial aid because it wouldn't cost a fortune to go to college. It shouldn't cost $400,000, and kids that can't afford it wouldn't need the aid that they get because they would have aid, but we would need $400,000 of it. And so I hope that every child, every student in America can go to whatever college they want, but they're not going to as long as class sizes are limited and the price tags keep going up. Another interesting tidbit that I have found in all of this is all these endowments. One of my colleagues on the other side said taxpayer money was meant to go towards funding this. If an Ivy League institution has billions of dollars in their endowments, then I'm wondering how much needs to be given to this university with extra taxpayer dollars. Dr. Cooper, will you comment on that?
Absolutely. Some of these Ivy League universities have endowments in the tens of billions. Harvard is an endowment north of $50 billion. And these institutions actually are less likely to provide institutional financial aid than other private colleges with fewer resources.
And yet my colleague over here seems to just be outraged that we would want Harvard or Brown or name your university to use their endowment billions to educate the masses rather than to use taxpayer dollars to further their cost escalations and their price increases. Am I missing something, Dr. Cooper?
I think you're right. Harvard and other Ivy League institutions could certainly be doing a lot more with the tremendous resources they have available to make college more affordable for their students and to expand to more talented students.
Well, I praise your work. I'm sorry on behalf of my colleagues on the left that seem to be so angry with your exposing of the corruption and the collusion and the exorbitant cost increases of Ivy League educations. I can't hear one peep out of them with respect to the anti-Semitism in these same Ivy League institutions. They're all mad at President Trump for actually standing up against this anti-Semitism that we're seeing. They're mad at President Trump for trying to bring down the cost and saying to these Ivy League institutions, we're not going to keep sending you money of U.S. taxpayer dollars as long as you're helping to propagate this anti-Semitism. They're doing nothing about this. And Democrats are so mad at the president for standing up for the students and for standing up for the taxpayers that they instead are wasting your time going after you. So keep it up, Mr. Shea, Dr. Cooper, Mr. Martin. I appreciate your work, and I encourage you to keep the pressure on Brown, especially Mr. Shea. Don't be discouraged, and know that the American people, the vast majority of the American people, support your efforts, and we stand with you, and we share your views. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. We have a couple of unanimous consent requests. Mr. Correa first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unanimous consent for the, including the following items in our record. First one, Trump is crushing America's AI leadership. We still have time to fix it. April 23rd, 2025.
Without objection.
J.D. Vance wanted aggressively attack American universities. June 3rd, 2025. Cost of federally sponsored research infographic on the Association of American Universities website.
Without objection.
2022. Benefiting society and the economy, American technology transfer for 2023. Federal R&D cuts would be another unforced policy error. Number 7, America's R&D rethink threatens its innovation supremacy. Number 8, New American Fortune 500 in 2024. American Immigration Council. Number 9, U.S. scientists warn that Trump's cuts will set off brain drain. Number 10, these are the U.S. universities more dependent on international students. And number 11, losing international students could devastate many colleges. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
Mr.
I'll
Chairman.
ask unanimous consent to enter the record the following: a Washington Post article titled "Students Overpaid Elite Colleges $685 Million, Price Fixing Suit." A press release from Berger Montague titled "Plaintiffs in Elite University Price Fixing Case Settle with Caltech and Johns Hopkins." And then also plaintiff's memorandum of law in support of their motion for class certification in the case of Corzo versus Brown. The gentlewoman from...
Mr. Chairman, I just had one more, if I could.
Go ahead.
This is for one article entitled, Congressional Republicans' Budget Reconciliation Bill Imperils 4.4 million Pell Grant Recipients.
Without objection. The gentlewoman from Vermont is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We should be able to work together and find bipartisan solutions to this problem. I have 2 teenagers myself. They're starting to look at colleges. I've got sticker shock, as do most parents who go through this process. And I am really worried about all of the talented students who don't even apply, not just because of the tuition or the room and board, but simply the fees in order to apply. It's out of reach for so many families, and the astronomical costs mean working people do not have a fair shot at higher education. I think that is why we have been so vocal today about the cuts to the Pell Grant program. Everyone seems to agree that the high cost of college is a real problem in this country, but we can't seem to agree on how it is that we're going to bring down tuition costs. This is the kind of things that Americans want us to be working on, to the point that my colleague was making here. They want us to come together and actually dig into the problem of how we solve this so that every student has an opportunity to go to college. But that's not actually why we're here today. It's so clear that that's not what this is actually about. Dr. Morgan, I'm so glad that you're here, and I thank you so much for your time. Can you, take us through sort of the crux of what it is that we're supposed to be doing here, which is unpacking all of this? What are the things that are driving these higher costs in education?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It differs really by sector. There are a lot of varied factors that go into college costs, but it really differs by the type of institution and the type of business model. So when we take a look at a for-profit college, they're out to maximize their profit. So the cost of providing the education is actually quite low and doesn't really drive the tuition prices. Their cost of marketing is quite high because they're trying to bring people in the door. When we think about state institutions and community colleges that are educating the majority of students who go to college in this country, studies have shown that the thing that is really driving their costs, or the cost of tuition, is state appropriations. And so that's why I've been quite focused on what federal and state aid, and local aid as well, is going to these colleges, and how what we do at the federal level impacts those state budgets. Because I think we are going to see a squeeze on state budgets that increases the price of tuition. And what we've seen in the past is that it takes a really long time to unwind that, even if we're looking at something that, that only affects a given year.
So what you're saying is true, that if we are not investing in the institutions that most of our students go to, we are compounding the problem.
That's
right. So I really appreciate that. When we're talking about the affordability problem, are we talking about all institutions of higher education in the United States, or is it just the Ivies?
I think there's a broad swath of colleges where the tuition is quite high and where they're using these opaque discounting models to get to a net price. But there are a lot of colleges in this country that have held their costs quite low despite, weathering the storms of state budgets and cuts to federal aid, and are really doing their best to provide an education at a transparent price to people where they can come out with as little debt as possible. I do think one thing to think about with that group of institutions and that group of students is how the costs in the rest of those students' lives have gone up.
That's right.
For community college students in particular, they're going to be affected by cuts to things like SNAP. They're also affected by the impact of things like the tariffs and the cost of living increases that's driving for families. So for them, the whole package and their indebtedness to achieve an education is going to be higher because of all of the rising costs that we're seeing right now.
I really appreciate that. It's a complicated problem. It requires a seriousness of purpose and not some sham hearing. My Republican colleagues are not here to seriously investigate the problem of college affordability. They are here to advance Donald Trump's culture war against people and institutions that he doesn't like, and to go after anyone who remotely disagrees with him. He wants to continue to silence the opposition. The reason I know this is because my Republican colleagues, every single one of them across the aisle here, voted to eliminate or reduce student aid, increase monthly student loan payments, and drive students to take out predatory private loans. So this hearing, once again, which we have seen over and over again in this committee, is to do the president's dirty work. We have real work that we should be doing to support our students, but we are preoccupied with going after the president's supposed political enemies. It's a shame, and it's a disservice to our students across this country. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield my 5 minutes to the Mr. Niels from Texas.
Thank you, Ms. Hageman. Thank you for our witnesses taking the time to be here. As we've already discussed, the tuition rates at self-proclaimed elite universities have ballooned over the years due to long-standing collusion between them, long-standing collusion. This has allowed these schools to accumulate the kind of severe administrative bloat rarely seen outside of our own federal government. As Dr. Cooper testified, Ivy League universities average 1 non-instructional staff per 2 students. How do you like that ratio? Yet the average private university gets by with 1/3 the administrative staff. And much like we see in the federal government at some point, bureaucracies, they get so big, fat, bloated,
that they serve no real purpose other than to justify their own existence. If these elite universities have one administrative employee for every 2 students, then what exactly are they employed to do? Well, one of our witnesses, Mr. Alex Shea, decided to ask. Great question, Alex. Pursuant to his work as a student journalist investigating administrative bloat at Brown, Mr. Shea emailed all 3,805 non-faculty employees of the university to inquire about what their job entailed, right? Rather than simply respond to the inquiry, Brown chose to initiate disciplinary proceedings against Mr. Shea. I was so appalled when I heard about this that I wrote a letter to Brown urging them to reverse course. I believe our fearless leader, Chairman Jordan, and the committee, they wrote a letter, and Brown reversed course, and I'm glad they did. It's one thing to create a vast, useless administrative bureaucracy to justify an exorbitant tuition rate of $93,000, but to punish a student journalist for daring to ask a question about it is unacceptable. Mr. Shea, what first prompted you to make the inquiry?
That's an excellent question. So Brown has a $46 million budget shortfall, even while charging students the price of a luxury car. And it doesn't seem like they want to cut any administrators. They're having hiring freezes, but they're not willing to cut any jobs. So I thought this was something that needed to be looked into.
Why do you think the employees at your email, they didn't answer your questions? Many of them didn't respond?
Well, some of them answered, and the ones who answered seemed to have pretty useful jobs. So I guess we can maybe infer that the ones who didn't have jobs that are not so important.
The ones that didn't were too embarrassed. They were too embarrassed. They weren't going to respond to you. Why do you think elite schools like Brown might be more frugal in administrative spending if they had to pay the same 21% tax rate on their endowment profits as corporations?
Certainly. I mean, when you have to pay higher taxes, there's less money floating around, and you got to tighten the budget.
Now that's beautiful. We put it in reconciliation now. So these universities, it was 1.4. Now it's going to go to 21%. 21%. I'm so excited that legislation was in our reconciliation. How about you, Dr. Cooper? What do you think?
I think that the 21% tax on endowments will probably induce some belt tightening among these Ivy League institutions. And I would also note that the tax is structured such that if you expand your enrollment, you face a lower tax rate. And that might be an inducement that some of these colleges need to actually admit more qualified students from middle-income backgrounds.
Well, let me be clear. We're not actually taxing the endowment itself. It's the net profits, the earnings on their investments. And we're expecting $7 to $10 billion annually. $7 to $10 billion. It's a big deal. Mr. Cooper, the average 4-year private university costs around $35,000 per student, while the Ivy Leagues average $126,000. To what degree is administrative bloat attributed to this?
I can't imagine that most of that extra $126,000 in spending per student is really going to benefit students. What we see is much higher administrator to student ratios at Ivy League institutions than other private colleges.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hageman. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the gentlewoman from Wyoming's time is yielded back. I now recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing highlights a real problem, the crisis of affordability in higher education. But instead of focusing on systemic issues and solutions, Republicans have chosen a narrow and misleading target, the Ivy League, which enrolls less than 1%, half of 1% of all undergraduate students. It's been stated before. Rising costs are not unique to the Ivy League. Over the last 2 decades, tuition and fees at private and public universities have increased by over 100%. So this problem isn't limited to antitrust violations by the Ivy League. It's a problem that affects working families, regardless of which school students attend. And this problem is rooted in the commodification of education. Many schools have become real estate trusts and hedge funds that treat education as an afterthought. They game the ranking system by jacking up tuition, offering discounts in the form of financial aid, knowing that they can exploit the student loan program and load their students with debt. This model has been a disaster for students and for our economy. Higher education is becoming more essential and more unaffordable. Over 40 million people hold nearly $2 trillion in debt. And Black and Latino students, immigrant students, and first-generation students in particular are being priced out of opportunity. So in addition to antitrust enforcement, Congress must act. And we should consider policy options like tuition-free public college, caps on tuition increases, increased need-based aid, reforms to the student loan system, and support for trade and vocational schools. Not everyone needs to go to college. But if Republicans were serious about affordability, we'd see policy solutions. We don't see that. Instead, we see culture wars. Let's talk about what they actually do. Ms. Morgan, thank you for being here. Let me ask you a simple yes or no question. Does gutting the Department of Education lower tuition costs?
It does not.
Thank you. Does cutting research funding for universities lower tuition costs?
It does not.
Does cutting financial aid programs and student debt relief lower tuition costs?
Definitely does not.
Does suppressing free speech and enforcing a Trump-approved ideology lower tuition costs?
It does not.
Thank you. And as usual, Republicans are pretending to be firefighters when they're actually arsonists. We need to address the cost of higher education, but nothing in their cruel reconciliation bill does that. So this hearing is just a hypocritical distraction. Republicans fight culture wars, they manufacture outrage, and funnel taxpayer dollars to billionaires and to ICE while defunding higher education, programs that help working class students, those that I represent in Congress, and other vital resources for our communities. Working families and our communities deserve better. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you that are on the panel today for your testimony. We've been in and out of other committee meetings, but I did have the privilege of reading your written testimonies in advance, and I do want to just ask you a couple of questions. You know, for decades, elite universities were protected by the antitrust exemption under the understanding that they were going to provide these need-blind financial aid, which they arguably are not. And so, Mr. Martin, I want to go to you first. In your view, did the exemption do anything meaningful to bring down colleges' cost to make colleges' expense more accessible?
I've not studied that, Congressman, but I'm aware of nothing.
Okay. We really, I think, have seen what 30 years of colluding about the financial aid formulas did to college affordability and accessibility, but the exemption expired in 2022. So my question again, Mr. Martin, would be to you, if we want students to be offered the best college experience at the lowest possible price, should Congress enact another antitrust exemption like Section 568 or force the schools to compete against one another?
As an antitrust lawyer, Congressman, the free market is generally the best tool for solving problems of prices.
Well, and I too, I believe that competition would play a role in bringing down college costs. And we have data from the last 30 years that the antitrust exemption only succeeded in making our elite institutions more elite and further remove the needs of everyday Americans. So thank you for your response. I want to go to Mr. Shea. And Mr. Shea, you caused quite a stir with your email to Brown's employees. Your efforts to shine a light on Brown University's excess mirrors our fight in Congress to cut wasteful spending as we're dealing with it day in and day out. Can you, I don't want to give you a chance to explain your motivation for shining a light on what you describe as administrative bloat.
Exactly. Well, I think the root of the problem is that Brown is just so darn unaffordable for students all across the country, and that's why Brown has the richest median income of all the Ivy League schools. Like I said, half of the Brown student body is from the top 5% of Americans, and I just think that's wrong. I think that's morally wrong because the Ivy League is supposed to be a ladder to the American dream, but we're pulling up the ladder so that only rich kids can access it, and I think that's wrong.
And I noticed in your written testimony that you pointed out there's roughly a ratio of 1 administrator for every 2 students. And I got to ask you, is this necessary for Brown students to obtain a degree?
Certainly not. We've seen that in the past. Brown didn't have this ratio, and it has functioned fine for hundreds of years. Across the pond, Oxford and Cambridge don't have that many administrators, and they function fine. Certainly, all these administrators are not necessary.
And I would say, does this number of administrators meaningfully impact the overall experience of Brown students?
Certainly not, and they might even detract from it, because when budget cuts need to be made, the enormous administrative bloat means that, and their unwillingness to reduce it means that the costs have to be cut somewhere else.
Right. So, and which leads you almost answer my other question, is how could cutting some of the bloat benefit the consumer that's looking to come to Brown?
Well, absolutely. Like dorms flood, the food is unappetizingly bad, and the quality just keeps getting worse. Like they're reducing red meat from all the dining halls. They say it's about the environment, but it's really about the cost. And by reducing administrative bloat, we definitely could see some improvements in the student experience.
Thank you. Dr. Cooper, let me ask you, you said in your written testimony that, quote, the surplus revenues that Ivy League institutions enjoy currently fuel administrative bloat, but they could be used to create more seats for qualified applicants. Can you explain the benefits for our entire nation that could come from increased enrollment at these elite institutions?
Absolutely. Right now, if you look at elite institutions graduates, they are vastly overrepresented in the elites of business, politics, and media. And if we were to expand Ivy League undergraduate colleges to more students, that would enable more students to get their foot in the door for this pipeline and enable, a greater diversity of folks in those elite positions. So I would love to see Ivy League institutions use their endowments, use all the money they're currently spending on administration to expand and create opportunity for more of those students.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all of you for shining the light that you're shining today. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back without objection. I ask unanimous consent to enter the record the following. A press release from the Department of Justice titled Consent Decree Settles Charge of Conspiracy to Restrain Price Competition on Financial Aid Against Major Universities, and an article by Saja Sarda titled How to Crush the Ivy League Cartel, and finally a document number 753-18 filed in the case of Henry versus Brown University on December 16th, 2024. We now recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's be clear, everybody. There is no 568 antitrust exemption thanks to the Biden administration. And as far as Mr. Xi's testimony is concerned, Brown did not discipline Mr. Xi, contrary to his report. And also, Mr. Xi's numbers in terms of administration staff for Brown University are incorrect. So, and I'm surprised that you would pull up the ladder for students who are going to regular universities and colleges, prevent them from getting financial aid. That's crazy. But at any rate, Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican supporters in Congress are attacking our elite institutions of higher learning because these institutions and others produce the critical thinkers who stand opposed to the global trend towards authoritarianism and dictatorship, which Donald Trump and MAGA represent. They say this hearing is about 8 Ivy League institutions and the cost of higher education, but that is just a facade. This is really about Trump's war on facts, debate, and truth. This is Trump's attack on academia, which comes straight out of the authoritarian playbook. Universities are full of smart, young, engaged people, and the institutions are committed to freedom of inquiry and diversity of thought. Universities provide independent sources of information and accountability. Indeed, individuals with higher levels of education are less likely to be tricked by authoritarian appeals. So any autocrat or dictator who wants to exercise limitless, arbitrary power sees independent institutions of higher education as a threat. After all, Donald Trump can't replace our democracy with a dictatorial regime if the people are smart enough to recognize that he is a threat to freedom, liberty, and justice, which our democracy guarantees. Dr. Morgan, I believe that academia is inextricably tied to our democracy and to our liberty. Can you talk about why higher education is important for the protection of freedom and democracy?
Absolutely. You know, first of all, our institutions of higher learning are places where people come together and learn and have to, kind of be in the same place as people with different opinions. So it really promotes democratic values from the start. But to your point, universities can also be a place of free inquiry that can result in information that can oppose or point out flaws in larger societal trends or political trends. So they can be really important voices in our societies. They're also places that produce research that can help us better understand what's happening in the world around us, including what's happening, the kind of effects of the negative changes that a presidential administration might be putting in place. So they're incredibly important to our democracy and to our society.
Thank you. As a lawyer, I've watched with horror as a number of law firms bent a knee and succumbed to Donald Trump's unlawful pressure campaign. But I'm proud of the brave firms that chose to stand up for the rule of law. Now, as Trump goes after the universities, I'm equally concerned. In March, Columbia University caved to Trump's demands when the administration threatened to yank away $400 million in federal funding. Yet, more recently, Harvard is showing backbone in rejecting Trump's demands. Dr. Morgan, why is it important that universities stand up against the administration's attacks? And conversely, what would happen if universities succumbed and started towing the line for this administration?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important that universities follow the law, but do not submit to demands that have nothing to do with their legal requirements. You can see in the attacks on Harvard and the kind of proposed solutions from the Trump administration that they're looking to really control the minutia of the decisions at those colleges. That's not an appropriate role for the federal government to take. I think the other thing that's important to understand here is that other universities are going to take their cues from what these much better resourced institutions are able to do in terms of standing up to the administration. So it's really important for those universities that have the resources to do so to take a stand.
So attacking elite institutions is a canary in the coal mine.
That's right.
All institutions of higher learning are under attack.
That's right.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shea, what did you say tuition was again at Brown, annual tuition?
It's $93,064 in direct costs.
93, and that doesn't count room and board and books and everything. That's just tuition, right?
No, that's including room and board.
That's everything? Okay, $93,000. How many students you say again was at Brown? Over 7,000, I think you said?
7,000.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money coming in. Maybe it could be some grants, it could be some aid, it could be some, loans, whatever, but 93,000 times 7, it's like $700 million coming into Brown every year. And you asked a fundamental question, sort of simple question. You asked the question, where the heck's all the money going, right? And you said, maybe I'll check the administrators. How many administrators are having? You said, I think the number you said was 3,805, is that right?
Yep.
And then you sent a letter to these guys asking another fundamental question. What do you do all day? And what was the response you said? Most of them did get back with you?
Most of them didn't respond, and we were hit with disciplinary charges.
So the administrators couldn't respond to a simple question. You're taking in $700 million a year. What the heck are you 3,800 administrators doing The administrators didn't respond, but the administration came after you. Is that right?
That's right. When you investigate the administration, it turns out they investigate you back.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me because the ranking member of the full committee and the ranking member of the subcommittee talked about academic freedom and the First Amendment. You were asking these questions on behalf of a student news publication, right?
Right.
Was it Brown, what's the name of your paper? Brown Spectator?
Yep.
And they come after you. Why do you think they did that? Why did they come well, first of all, what did they come after you about? What did you allegedly do wrong?
Well, first it was emotional and psychological harm, invasion of privacy, and misrepresentation. And then they decided to charge me with violating the technology policy.
Asking someone how they spend your money is emotional harm? That's what they alleged?
Apparently.
And then what happened in the investigation?
Well, then they escalated and they charged the entire board of directors of the Brown Spectator for violating Brown's trademark because our publication is named the Brown Spectator, which is just a completely bogus claim. And
Are there other newspapers that would use Brown in the name of the paper?
Yes. Our other newspaper is the Brown Daily Herald.
Probably in the entire history of the university, there's been some kind of Brown publication, right?
Certainly.
Yeah, I mean, that's just ridiculous. Why do you really think they did it? Why did they really come after you?
I think that they were upset that we unveiled the rot that was going on. All these administrators with pretty useless jobs, and
that's certainly one reason they were mad at you. But I think it's probably more. I think they were trying to make sure no one else would do it in the future. That's always the way it works. The left comes after people. They want to chill speech so it doesn't happen again. Do you think that was part of their motivation?
I think that certainly was true, but it backfired terribly.
Sure did, because you're brave enough to keep talking. You can come here and testify, so God bless you for doing that. Now, you can have, I'll direct this to you, Mr. Martin, you can have a bloated bureaucracy when you're colluding on price and making sure you're not competing on price with other similarly situated institutions. Is that right, Mr. Martin?
Yes.
And you're not supposed to do that, are you, according to the law? Is that right, Mr. Martin?
To collude on price, it's per se unlawful.
It's per se unlawful. And you can also have bloated bureaucracy when you collude on price and you limit output, you limit class size. Is that right, Mr. Martin?
That's correct.
And do you think that's going on at these? There's a third one. You can also do all this if you engage in perfect price discrimination, where you get all this information on the student and their families, what they make, where it goes, what they owe, what their retirement is, all this information. You can say, that student can pay this amount, and you'll take it right to the edge where they can pay and get perfect price discrimination. So when you do those three things, you can afford to have 3,805 administrators for 7,000 students. Is that right, Mr. Martin?
You make an excellent point. The more perfect the information, the more perfect the collusion can be, algorithmically or otherwise.
Of course, and that's exactly what's going on. Is that right, Dr. Cooper?
The evidence is certainly consistent with that, yes.
That's what the evidence shows. And yet the other side says, oh, how dare Mr. Fitzgerald have this hearing? You got to be kidding me. They tried to chill the speech of a news publication at the university for a student they're supposed to be serving, asking a simple and fundamental question. And they want to chill that because they don't want anyone to look under the covers and see that they're colluding on price, they're limiting output, and they're doing perfect price discrimination. Imagine that. Imagine that. And we're not supposed to have a hearing? Holy cow. I want to thank the chairman for doing the hearing. I want to thank all of you for testifying. And Mr. Shea, thank you for stepping forward and letting the country know what's going on at these elite universities.
Will the gentleman yield for a quick question?
I yield back to the chairman. I'll yield. You got.
Well, I just wonder if your feelings are the same about the attacks on a private student publication called the Harvard Law Review taking place by the Trump administration right now.
Well, I think the chairman or the ranking member knows that you and I have been strong defenders of the press. We have co-sponsored together the Press Act, defending the press. I will continue to do that. But I'm focused on the situation in front of us today, Mr. Shea at Brown University.
I'm with you. Hold the thought, and more power to the free press at Brown and at Harvard.
God bless America.
Gentlemen's time has expired. That concludes today's hearing. We want to thank our witnesses.
I have a unanimous consent request.
Oh, Mr. Nadler has a UC request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article entitled Ivy League Schools Financial Aid from the Ivy Coach Daily. And it says, moreover, while the sticker price at the Ivy League schools is high, about $90,000 per year, roughly half of the students receive financial aid with average awards covering 2/3 or more of the cost. The vast majority of students from Ivy League schools graduate with no loans. Half of the Ivy League schools offer a completely free education to families whose incomes are $75,000 or less.
Is that the title or the whole article? That's the whole article, yeah.
And I have
Without objection.
A second unanimous consent request, shorter. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from Chicago Booth Review titled, Who's at Fault for Student Loan Defaults, that argues that this article reviews research that analyzes student loan defaults and finds that for-profit colleges, half of the student loan defaults are from programs that only enroll 10% of U.S. students. Furthermore, the review argues that default rates are not being driven by tuition costs.
Without objection. That concludes today's hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses and additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.